in the silence between heartbeats, between the tick of seconds and the turn of centuries. The earth holds its breath and remembers. Beneath your feet, stone whispers stories older than language, older than the first human eye that gazed upon the stars. Tonight, we descend into the deep places where time moves differently, where a single grain of sand carries the memory of mountains, and where the planet itself becomes our storyteller. Here, in the realm of deep time, geological mysteries unfold like ancient scrolls written in stone and shadow. Each crater, each formation, each hidden chamber carved by forces beyond human comprehension speaks of cataclysms that shaped not only the Earth's surface, but the very trajectory of human civilization. These are the stories written in rock and written in silence, waiting for those brave enough to listen to the planet's deepest secrets. If this journey into history gently moves you, take a second to like, share, and subscribe. It helps more sleepy minds find their way here. By the way, where in the world are you listening from? What time is it where you are? Drop a comment before you drift off. We read every single one. Deep in the heart of the Saharan vastness, where sand dunes shift like the breathing of some slumbering giant, there exists a formation so perfect, so impossibly circular, that it seems carved by the hand of some ancient god. The Richet structure stretches across 48 kilometers of Mauritanian desert, its concentric rings visible only from the sky, as if the earth itself had opened its eye to gaze upon the heavens. From space, astronauts first glimpsed this wonder in the 1960s, and their reports filtered down to geologists like whispered secrets from another world. Here was something that defied easy explanation, something that looked artificial yet was undoubtedly natural, something that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of deep time itself. The local Berber people had always known of this place, speaking of it in hushed tones as the Eye of Africa, a sacred circle where the spirits of the desert gathered to watch over the wandering sands. For decades, scientists struggled to understand what force could create such geometric perfection in a landscape, otherwise dominated by the chaos of wind and erosion. The rings, they discovered, were composed of different types of rock quartzites and sandstones, alternating with volcanic rocks and sedimentary layers, each band telling a different chapter in the Earth's ancient story. But the mystery deepened with each study, each core sample, each attempt to unlock the secret of the Richet's formation. Some researchers proposed that the structure was the eroded remains of a massive dome, pushed upward by geological forces, deep beneath the Earth's crust. Others suggested it was the remnant of an ancient impact crater, scarred into the desert by a meteorite so large that its collision echoed through geological time. But the more they studied the rocks, the more questions arose. The minerals showed signs of having been subjected to intense heat and pressure, yet not quite in the pattern one would expect from either theory. As the years passed and technology advanced, the mystery only deepened. Satellite imagery revealed that the Richet structure was not a lot smaller. Similar formations dotted the surrounding desert, as if the Earth's surface was marked by a series of ancient scars, each one a testament to some long-forgotten cataclysm. The precision of the rings, the way they maintained their circularity despite millions of years of erosion, suggested forces at work the geology was only beginning to understand. The local legends took on new significance in this light. The Berber elders spoke of a time when the desert bloomed, when great rivers flowed where now only sand dunes rolled. They told stories of a civilization that once thrived in this place, a people who built great cities in perfect circles, mimicking the sacred geometry they saw written in the landscape itself. These stories, dismissed by early explorers as mere folklore, began to resonate with new meaning as archaeologists uncovered evidence of ancient settlements scattered throughout the Sahara. But it was the Greek philosopher Plato who unknowingly provided the most enduring mystery surrounding the Richat structure. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BCE, Plato described the lost city of Atlantis as a series of concentric rings of land and water, stretching across a vast plain beyond the Pillars of Hercules. For centuries, scholars had debated whether Atlantis was a philosophical allegory or a memory of some real place. Lost to time and catastrophe, the discovery of the Richat structure reignited this ancient debate. Here, in the Sahara, was a formation that matched Plato's description with uncanny precision. The concentric rings were there, the vast scale was there, and the location beyond the Pillars of Hercules from a Greek perspective fit perfectly. Moreover, geological evidence suggested that this region of the Sahara had indeed once been a lush, water-rich environment, transformed into desert only in relatively recent geological time. Could the Eye of the Sahara be the true location of Atlantis? The question tantalized researchers and amateur historians alike. They pointed to the Greek historian Herodotus, who had written of a people called the Atlantes, who lived near a mountain called Atlas in the western Sahara. They noted that the indigenous name for the region, Adria, meant mountain and bore, a striking resemblance to Atlas. The more they looked, the more connections they found between ancient texts and this mysterious formation in the desert. Yet the rocks themselves remained stubbornly silent on the question of human habitation. No great cities had been found within the Richat structure, no evidence of the advanced civilization Plato described. Instead, what archaeologists found were the traces of much older human-present Stone Age tools, rock art, and the remains of settlements that spoke of hunter-gatherers who had adapted to the changing climate as the Sahara transformed from savanna to desert. Perhaps this was the true mystery of the Richat structure, not whether it was Atlantis, but how a geological formation could so perfectly echo the deep patterns of human imagination. The concentric circles that appeared in Plato's account also appeared in countless other cultures, in the sacred mandalas of Tibetan Buddhism, in the stone circles of ancient Britain, in the cosmic diagrams of Mayan astronomy. It was as if the geometry of the Earth's deepest processes had somehow imprinted itself on the human psyche, creating a shared language of circles and centers that transcended cultural boundaries. Standing at the edge of the Richat structure today, a visitor might feel this connection between the cosmic and the human, between the vast scales of geological time and the brief flicker of human consciousness. The silence here is profound, broken only by the whisper of wind across stone and sand. In this silence, the earth seems to speak directly to the soul, reminding us that we are part of a much larger story, one written in stone and star and the patient turning of the seasons. The formation continues to erode, its perfect circles slowly blurring under the constant assault of wind and sand. In a few million years, it may be nothing more than a slight depression in the desert floor, its mystery lost forever to the patient work of time. But for now, it remains a window into deep time, a reminder of the forces that shaped our planet, and perhaps a mirror reflecting our own deepest dreams of lost civilizations and forgotten wisdom across the world, scattered like the remnants of some cosmic battle lie the wounds left by visitors from space. These impact craters, some obvious and dramatic, others hidden beneath layers of sediment and centuries of erosion, tell the story of Earth's violent relationship with the cosmos. Each one is a time capsule, preserving not only the moment of impact, but also the world as it existed in that instant of destruction and transformation in the Canadian Shield. Sudbury Basin stretches across 60 kilometers of Ontario landscape, its elliptical outline barely visible to those who walk its rim today. Yet beneath this peaceful forest and farmland lies one of the most significant impact sites on Earth. A crater formed nearly 2 billion years ago when an asteroid larger than any mountain struck the planet with the force of countless atomic bombs. The impact was so violent that it melted rock for hundreds of kilometers, creating mineral deposits that would later draw human civilization to this remote corner of North America. The indigenous peoples of this region, the Ojibwe and Cree, preserved, in their oral traditions, stories of the time when fire fell from the sky, when the earth shook and the rocks melted like water. For generations, these stories were dismissed by European colonizers as mere mythology, colorful tales with no basis in scientific fact. But as geologists began to understand the true nature of the Sudbury Basin, these ancient stories took on new significance. Here were human memories, passed down through countless generations, of an event that had occurred before complex life had even evolved on Earth. How could such memories persist across such vast stretches of time? The question haunted researchers who studied the intersection of human culture and geological history. Perhaps, they speculated, the impact had left traces not only in stone, but in the landscape of human imagination, creating archetypal images of fire and catastrophe that found expression in myths and legends around the world. The flood stories found in cultures from Mesopotamia to the Americas, the tales of cosmic battles between gods and monsters, the widespread motifs of worlds destroyed and renewed all might be echoes of humanity's deep encounter with the violent forces that had shaped their planet. In Germany, the Nördlingen rise presents a different face of cosmic violence. This crater, formed 15 million years ago by the impact of an asteroid roughly 1 kilometer across, is so perfectly preserved that it served as a training ground for Apollo astronauts preparing for their lunar missions. The town of Enigma sits within the crater's rim, its medieval walls built from suvatar, distinctive rock formed only by the extreme pressures and temperatures of impact events. For centuries, the townspeople quarried this strange, speckled stone without understanding its origin. They built their churches and houses from the very material created by cosmic catastrophe, unknowingly constructing their community from the ruins of ancient destruction. The stone itself contained microscopic diamonds, formed in the instant of impact, when carbon was subjected to pressures and temperatures that exist nowhere else on Earth's surface. These diamonds, too small to be seen with the naked eye, glittered in the walls of medieval buildings like captured starlight. The discovery of the crater's true nature came only in the 1960s, when 2 American geologists identified the telltale signs of impact: shattered quartz crystals with microscopic striations that could only be formed by the shock waves of cosmic collision. Suddenly, the peaceful farming community found itself at the center of an international scientific sensation. Researchers flocked to the rise, marveling at the preserved record of violence written in stone. But it was the human dimension of this discovery that proved most fascinating. Archaeological evidence showed that humans had been drawn to this crater for thousands of years, attracted by something they could not name or understand. Stone Age hunters had camped along the crater's rim, Celtic tribes had built hill forts on its elevated edges, and Roman soldiers had marched along roads that followed its circular outline. It was as if the ancient impact had created not only a physical structure, but a magnetic pull on human consciousness, drawing generation after generation to witness the scar left by cosmic violence. Similar patterns emerged at impact sites around the world. The Meteor crater in Arizona, formed only 50,000 years ago, was known to local Native American tribes as a sacred site long before scientists understood its origin. The Diné Navajo people told stories of a star that fell to Earth, bringing with it both destruction and sacred power. They collected fragments of the iron meteorite that had created the crater, using them to make tools and ceremonial objects that carried the essence of star metal into their daily lives. European settlers, arriving in the late 19th century, initially dismissed the perfectly circular depression as a volcanic crater or a collapsed cave. It was only through the persistent investigations of mining engineer Daniel Barringer that the truth of the crater's origin was established. Barringer, convinced that a massive iron meteorite lay buried beneath the crater floor, invested his fortune in mining operations that ultimately proved fruitless. The meteorite had been almost entirely vaporized in the moment of impact, leaving only traces embedded in the crater walls. The irony was not lost on later researchers. Barringer had been wrong about finding the meteorite, but his investigations had established the reality of impact cratering on Earth, opening up an entirely new field of geological study. His failure had become the foundation for understanding one of the most important processes in planetary evolution. The crater that bears his name today stands as a monument not only to cosmic violence, but to the human quest to understand the forces that shaped our world in Australia's Red Heart. The Gosses Bluff crater tells a different story of impact and memory. Formed 142 million years ago when a comet struck during the age of dinosaurs. This crater has been sacred to the Arrernte people for thousands of generations. They call it Tunarolla, and their creation stories describe how a group of celestial women danced across the sky, with one woman dropping her baby, who fell to Earth and created the circular mountain range that marks the crater's rim. The precision of this story, its focus on something falling from the sky to create a circular landform, suggests that human memory can indeed preserve information across geological timescales in ways that Western science is only beginning to understand. The Arrernte people had identified the cosmic origin of Gosses Bluff long before any geologist had even heard of impact craters. Their story, encoded in ceremony and song, had kept alive a truth that science would only rediscover in the 20th century. These revelations forced scientists to reconsider the relationship between human culture and geological history. If indigenous stories could preserve accurate information about events that occurred millions of years ago, what other truths might be hidden in the world's oral traditions? Researchers began collaborating with indigenous elders and traditional knowledge keepers, recognizing that human memory might be a valuable tool for understanding Earth's violent past. The study of impact craters also revealed the profound role that cosmic collisions have played in the evolution of life itself. The Chicxulub crater, buried beneath Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, marked the boundary between the age of dinosaurs and the age of mammals. The impact that created this 180-kilometer crater 66 million years ago had triggered a global catastrophe that wiped out 3/4 of all species on Earth, including the non-avian dinosaurs that had dominated terrestrial ecosystems for 165 million years. But this destruction had also created opportunity. In the aftermath of the impact, small mammals that had lived in the shadows of the dinosaurs emerged to inherit a devastated but open world. The evolutionary radiation that followed gave rise to the diversity of mammalian life we see today, including ultimately the lineage that would lead to human beings in the deep places of the planet, where pressure transforms rock into crystal, and heat rewrites the very atomic structure of stone. Geological mysteries take on forms that challenge human comprehension. These are the wounds that never heal, the scars that preserve moments of violence and creation across spans of time that dwarf human history. Here, in the realm of metamorphic rock and migrating continents, the Earth keeps its most profound secrets. The Vredefort Dome in South Africa stands as the largest verified impact structure on Earth, a 300-kilometer scar created over 2 billion years ago when an asteroid larger than Table Mountain struck the ancient supercontinent. The impact was so violent that it created pressures exceeding those at the center of nuclear explosions, transforming ordinary rock into strange new minerals that exist nowhere else in nature. Coesite and stishovite, forms of quartz that can only be created under extreme shock conditions, glitter like alien jewels in the crater's metamorphic core. But time has been both destroyer and preserver. Erosion has stripped away the original crater rim, leaving only the deep roots of the impact structure exposed at the surface. What remains is a window into the Earth's interior, a cross-section through the planet's crust that reveals layers of rock formed under conditions of unimaginable violence. Geologists who study these rocks find themselves reading a story written in crystal and mineral, a narrative of destruction and transformation that spans geological eras. The indigenous peoples of this region, the San and later the Sacsayhuamán groups, recognized the sacred nature of this landscape long before its cosmic origin was understood. They carved petroglyphs into the ancient rocks, marking sites where the ancestors had communed with the spirits of the land. Some of these rock art sites are positioned precisely at locations where impact-generated minerals are exposed at the surface, as if the artists were drawn to create their sacred images on stone that had been touched by cosmic fire. Modern researchers studying these petroglyphs have found recurring motif circles within circles, radiating lines, and star-like patterns that bear an uncanny resemblance to the geological structures of the impact site itself. It is as if the ancient artists were recording in stone their intuitive understanding of the forces that had shaped their landscape, translating the language of geological violence into the symbolic vocabulary of human art. The desert winds carry whispers of older truths, and in the limestone hills of southeastern Turkey, those whispers become stone. Here, where the Mesopotamian plains meet the Anatolian highlands, the earth itself seems to hold its breath, waiting for someone to understand what it has preserved beneath 11,000 years of silence. Göbekli Tepe rises from this ancient landscape like a prayer carved in stone, its massive pillars reaching toward skies that have witnessed the birth and death of countless civilizations. But to understand this place, one must first understand the stones themselves. The stones themselves, thoms formed in primordial seas, shaped by pressures that existed before life learned to walk upright, before the first human hand ever touched fire. The limestone here tells a story that begins in the Cretaceous period, when shallow seas covered this region and tiny marine organisms settled into layers that would eventually become the foundation of humanity's first temple. Each layer represents millions of years of patient deposition, the slow accumulation of calcium carbonate that would one day be carved into pillars weighing 16 tons each, decorated with reliefs of animals that watched the world change. Klaus Schmidt, the German archaeologist who first recognized the true significance of this site, spoke of the stones as if they were alive, as if they carried memories in their crystalline structure. He would run his hands along the carved surfaces, feeling for the tool marks left by Neolithic craftsmen, searching for the human touch that transformed raw geology into sacred space. The limestone responded to his touch, revealing secrets that had been hidden for millennia. The quarrying of these massive stones represents one of humanity's earliest and most ambitious engineering projects. The ancient builders identified specific layers of limestone that possessed the right combination of hardness and workability rock that could be carved with stone tools, yet remain stable enough to support the weight of centuries. They understood the geology of their landscape in ways that speak to a sophisticated knowledge of stone behavior, of how different types of limestone, weather, and age, evidence of their quarrying techniques, remains visible in the bedrock surrounding the site. Ancient tool marks score the limestone, showing where massive blocks were carefully separated from the living rock. The precision of these cuts suggests not just technical skill, but an intimate understanding of the stone's grain and structure. These were not random excavations, but deliberate, planned operations that required generations of accumulated knowledge about how limestone fractures and responds to pressure. The pillars themselves stand as testaments to this geological intimacy. Each one was carved from a single block of limestone, shaped with tools that left their signatures in the stone. T-shaped and monolithic, they rise from the earth like ancient sentinels, their surfaces alive with carved reliefs of scorpions, lions, wild boar, and birds of prey. The artisans who created these images understood not just the spiritual significance of their work, but the physical properties of the stone that would preserve their art for millennia. But the true mystery of Göbekli Tepe extends beyond its visible structures into the geology beneath. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed additional pillars and chambers still buried in the limestone bedrock, suggesting that what we see today represents only a fraction of the original complex. The site appears to extend deep into the earth, following natural fractures and cavities in the limestone that the ancient builders incorporated into their sacred architecture. This underground dimension of Göbekli Tepe speaks to a sophisticated understanding of geological processes. The builders appear to have recognized and utilized natural limestone caves and fissures, expanding them into ritual spaces that merged human architecture with the Earth's own geological forms. Preliminary excavations have revealed chambers carved directly into the bedrock, their walls polished smooth by centuries of use, their floors worn by the passage of countless feet. The relationship between Göbekli Tepe and its geological context becomes even more intriguing when considered alongside the site's eventual burial. Around 8000 BCE, the entire complex was deliberately covered with tons of soil and stone, transforming it from a place of worship into an artificial hill. This burial was not random but carefully planned, with different types of fill material used to protect different areas of the site. The geological analysis of this fill material reveals that it came from various sources across the region, suggesting a massive, coordinated effort to preserve the site. Some of the fill consists of limestone chips and debris from the original construction, while other layers contain clay and organic matter that would have been carried from distant valleys. This suggests that the burial of Göbekli Tepe was not an act of abandonment, but of preservation, a deliberate attempt to protect the site from the geological forces of erosion and weathering. The reasons for this burial remain one of archaeology's greatest mysteries, but the geological evidence suggests that the ancient builders understood something about the long-term stability of their construction. The limestone that forms the foundation of the site is susceptible to specific types of weathering, particularly the chemical erosion that occurs when acidic groundwater interacts with calcium carbonate. By burying the site, the builders may have been attempting to protect it from these natural processes, ensuring its preservation for future generations. As we move west from Göbekli Tepe, the geological story becomes even more dramatic. The landscape transforms from the limestone hills of southeastern Turkey into the volcanic wonderland of Cappadocia, where ancient eruptions created a geology so unique that it seems to belong to another planet. Here, the intersection of volcanic activity and human civilization created one of the world's most remarkable underground landscapes. The story of Cappadocia begins in the Miocene epoch, when a series of volcanic eruptions covered the region with layers of ash and debris. These eruptions, originating from the nearby Urses and Hazen mountains, deposited thick layers of volcanic tufa, soft, porous rock formed from compressed volcanic ash. Over millions of years, wind and water erosion carved this tuff into the fantastic rock formations that define the region today. Towering pillars, hidden valleys, and natural chambers that would later become the foundation for one of history's most extensive underground cities. The volcanic tuff of Cappadocia possesses unique properties that made it ideal for human habitation. Soft enough to be carved with simple tools, yet strong enough to support the weight of multiple underground levels. This rock allowed ancient peoples to create subterranean cities of unprecedented scale and complexity. The porous nature of the tuff also provides natural insulation, keeping underground spaces cool in summer and warm in winter, while its chemical composition makes it naturally resistant to many forms of biological decay. The first humans to recognize the potential of this geological gift were the Hittites, who began carving simple chambers and storage spaces into the soft rock around 1400 BCE. But it was the early Christians, fleeing persecution in the Roman Empire, who transformed these geological features into vast underground cities. Between the 4th and 11th centuries CE, they expanded existing caves and carved new chambers, creating subterranean complexes that could house thousands of people for extended periods. Derinkuyu, the deepest of these underground cities, extends 8 levels into the earth, reaching a depth of approximately 60 meters. The geological challenges of creating such a complex were immense. The builders had to understand the structural properties of volcanic tuff, identifying which layers could support weight and which were too soft for construction. They had to recognize natural water sources and design ventilation systems that could move fresh air through kilometers of tunnels. The ventilation system of Derinkuyu represents one of the most sophisticated examples of geological engineering. In the ancient world, the builders identified natural fractures in the rock and expanded them into air shafts that connected the deepest levels of the city to the surface. These shafts, some of which extend the full depth of the complex, create a natural convection system that draws fresh air into the lower levels while expelling stale air through upper chambers. The water management system of the underground city demonstrates an equally sophisticated understanding of geological processes. The builders recognized that the volcanic tuff, despite its porous nature, contains layers of impermeable rock that could trap and channel groundwater. They carved wells and reservoirs that tapped into these natural water sources, creating a reliable supply system that could sustain the city's population even during extended sieges. The chambers themselves were carved according to the natural grain and structure of the volcanic tuff. Large communal spaces were excavated in areas where the rock was most stable, while smaller chambers and passages followed natural fractures and weaknesses in the stone. The builders left pillars of uncarved rock to support the weight of upper levels, creating a three-dimensional maze that was both structurally sound and defensively advantageous. The preservation of these underground cities owes much to the unique properties of volcanic tuff. Unlike limestone, which can be dissolved by acidic groundwater, tuff is chemically stable and resistant to most forms of weathering. The porous structure of the rock allows moisture to move through it without causing structural damage, while its mineral composition prevents the growth of destructive bacteria and fungi. But the geological story of Cappadocia extends beyond its underground cities into the surface landscape, where centuries of volcanic activity and erosion have created rock formations that seem to defy natural law. The fairy chimney stool, cone-shaped pillars topped with caps of harder rock represent a perfect example of differential erosion, where softer tuff is carved away by wind and water, while harder basalt capstones protect the pillars beneath. These natural formations became the foundation for another form of geological architecture, the rock-cut churches and monasteries of Cappadocia. Byzantine monks, recognizing the defensive and spiritual advantages of these natural towers, carved churches directly into the fairy chimneys, creating sacred spaces that merged human artistry with geological wonder. The churches of Göbekli, with their painted frescoes and carved altars, represent a unique synthesis of spirituality and geology, where the natural properties of volcanic tuff were used to create spaces for worship and contemplation. The frescoes themselves tell a story of geological adaptation. The painters who decorated these churches understood that the porous nature of tuff required special techniques to ensure the longevity of their art. They developed mineral-based pigments that would bond with the volcanic rock, creating paintings that have survived for more than 1,000 years. The colors deep blues from lapis lazuli, warm reds from iron oxides, brilliant golds from mineral compounds were chosen not just for their beauty, but for their chemical compatibility with the volcanic substrate. As we delve deeper into the geological mysteries of human civilization, we encounter places where the boundary between natural and artificial becomes almost impossible to distinguish. In the Lalibela region of Ethiopia, the intersection of volcanic geology and human spirituality created one of the world's most remarkable sacred landscapes, a complex of churches carved directly from living rock. The geology of Lalibela is dominated by volcanic tuff, similar to that found in Cappadocia, but with distinctive properties that influence the unique architecture of the region. The Ethiopian tuff is composed of volcanic ash from eruptions that occurred millions of years ago, compressed and hardened into a rock that is both workable and durable. The mineral composition of this tuff, rich in silica and alumina, gives it a distinctive red color that ranges from deep crimson to warm orange, depending on the iron content of the original volcanic material. The churches of Lalibela were carved from the top down, beginning with the surface and working progressively deeper into the bedrock. This technique required an intimate understanding of the rock's structure and properties. The builders had to identify areas where the tuff was homogeneous and free from fractures that could compromise the integrity of the finished structure. They had to recognize the direction of the rock's natural grain and plan their carving. Accordingly, the Church of St. George, the most famous of the Lalibela churches, exemplifies this geological artistry. Carved in the shape of a perfect Greek cross, the church extends 15 meters into the bedrock, its walls rising directly from the volcanic tuff. The precision of the carving is remarkable, The walls are perfectly vertical, the corners exactly square, the decorative elements carved with a delicacy that rivals the finest stone masonry. Yet this entire structure was created by removing rock rather than adding it. By understanding the geological properties of the volcanic tuff so thoroughly that the builders could carve spaces that would remain stable for centuries. The drainage system of the Lalibela churches demonstrates another aspect of geological engineering. The builders recognized that the porous nature of volcanic tuff, while advantageous for carving, could also allow water to seep into the structures and cause damage. They carved an elaborate system of channels and drains that direct rainwater away from the churches, following natural fractures in the rock to create a drainage network that has functioned for more than 800 years. The acoustic properties of these rock-cut churches reveal another dimension of geological understanding. The builders recognized that the density and structure of volcanic tuff would affect the sound quality within the carved spaces. They adjusted the proportions of the chambers and the texture of the surfaces to create optimal acoustic environments for liturgical music and prayer. The result is a series of spaces that enhance rather than muffle sound, where the natural properties of the rock serve to amplify and enrich the human voice. Moving from the volcanic highlands of Ethiopia to the granite landscapes of ancient Egypt, we encounter a different type of geological mystery: the precise quarrying and transportation of massive stone blocks that seem to defy the technological capabilities of their age. The granite quarries of Aswan, where ancient Egyptian stone workers extracted the raw material for obelisks, statues, and sarcophagi, represent one of the most sophisticated examples of geological engineering in the ancient world. Granite, formed deep within the Earth's crust under conditions of extreme heat and pressure, presents unique challenges for quarrying. Unlike the sedimentary rocks used for most ancient construction, granite is an igneous rock composed of interlocking crystals of quartz, feldspar, and mica. This crystalline structure makes granite extremely hard and durable, but also difficult to work with primitive tools. The ancient Egyptians developed techniques for quarrying granite that demonstrate a profound understanding of the rock's geological properties. The unfinished obelisk of Aswan, still attached to the bedrock and showing clear evidence of the quarrying process, provides insights into these ancient techniques. Tool marks on the granite surface show that the Egyptians used dolerite pounders balls of an even harder igneous rock to pound and bruise the granite until it could be broken away. This process required not just physical strength, but geological knowledge, understanding the crystal structure of granite, recognizing natural fractures and weaknesses, and knowing how different minerals within the rock would respond to pressure. The precision of ancient Egyptian granite work suggests that they possessed techniques for working with stone that we don't fully understand today. The granite sarcophagi found in pyramids and tombs are carved with tolerances that would challenge modern machine tools. The surfaces are polished to a mirror finish, the corners are perfectly square, and the internal chambers are carved with extraordinary precision. This level of workmanship required not just skill, but a deep understanding of granite's geological properties. Recent analysis of ancient Egyptian granite work has revealed evidence of techniques that seem to go beyond simple pounding and polishing. Some surfaces show tool marks that suggest the use of circular saws with cutting edges embedded with abrasive materials. Other evidence points to the use of tubular drills capable of boring precise holes in granite. These techniques require not just advanced tools, but sophisticated knowledge of granite's response to different types of cutting and abrasion. The transportation of massive granite blocks from the Aswan quarries to construction sites, hundreds of kilometers away, represents another aspect of geological engineering. The ancient Egyptians had to understand not just how to quarry granite, but how to move it without causing fractures or damage. They developed techniques for supporting and transporting blocks weighing hundreds of tons, using sledges, rollers, and ramps that distributed the weight across the underlying geology. The Colossi of Memnon, two massive granite statues that have stood in the Theban plain for more than 3,400 years, demonstrate the long-term stability of properly worked granite. Despite earthquakes, floods, and centuries of weathering, these statues remain essentially intact. The ancient Egyptians understood that granite, once properly shaped and positioned, would endure for millennia. They selected granite not just for its beauty but for its geological permanence. The mystery of the singing Colossus of Memnon adds another dimension to the geological story. For centuries, the northern statue produced a musical tone at dawn, a phenomenon that attracted visitors from across the ancient world. The sound was caused by thermal expansion of the granite as it heated in the morning sun, creating vibrations that resonated through natural fractures in the stone. This acoustic property was not accidental, but may have been deliberately enhanced by the ancient builders, who understood how granite's geological properties could be used to create sound. As we explore the deeper mysteries of geological engineering, we encounter evidence of ancient civilizations that possessed sophisticated knowledge of stone behavior and properties. The polygonal walls of Sacsayhuamán, built by the Inca near Cusco, Peru, demonstrate techniques for working with andesite volcanic rock even harder than granite. The massive blocks used in these walls are fitted together with such precision that a knife blade cannot be inserted between them, yet they were shaped without iron tools or mortar. The andesite used at Sacsayhuamán was quarried from deposits formed by ancient volcanic eruptions in the Andes Mountains. This rock, composed primarily of plagioclase, feldspar, and pyroxene, is extremely hard and difficult to work. The Inca developed techniques for shaping andesite that required not just physical skill, but geological understanding. They recognized natural fracture planes in the rock and used them to split massive blocks into workable pieces. They understood how andesite responds to heating and cooling, using fire-setting techniques to create controlled fractures. The fitting of these massive andesite blocks required knowledge of how different stones would settle and adjust over time. The Inca builders understood that andesite, despite its hardness, would undergo subtle changes in dimension as it adjusted to temperature variations and tectonic stresses. They shaped the blocks with allowances for these changes, creating joints that would tighten rather than loosen over time. The result is a structure that has remained stable for more than 500 years, surviving earthquakes that have damaged more recent constructions. The terraces of Ollantaytambo, another Inca site, demonstrate a different aspect of geological engineering: the use of local stone resources to create agricultural systems that work with rather than against the natural geology. The Inca recognized that the volcanic soils of the Andes, while fertile, were prone to erosion on steep slopes. They built terraces using local andesite, creating level planting surfaces that prevented soil loss while taking advantage of the region's volcanic fertility. These agricultural terraces represent a sophisticated understanding of soil geology and hydrology. The Inca builders recognized different types of volcanic soil and their properties, using this knowledge to create microclimates suitable for different crops. They understood how water moves through volcanic soils and designed drainage systems that prevented waterlogging while maintaining adequate moisture for plant growth. The terraces at Ollantaytambo continue to function today, more than 500 years after their construction. The mystery of Inca stone transport adds another dimension to the geological puzzle. The andesite blocks used in Inca construction were often quarried from sites many kilometers from the building location. Moving these massive stones across mountainous terrain required not just engineering skill, but geological knowledge. The Inca builders had to understand how different types of terrain would affect the transport of heavy loads, choosing routes that took advantage of geological features while avoiding areas where the underlying rock was too soft to support the weight. Recent archaeological investigations have revealed evidence of Inca stoneworking techniques that challenge our understanding of ancient technology. Tool marks on andesite surfaces suggest the use of cutting implements that could work harder stone with remarkable precision. Some evidence points to techniques that may have involved the use of plant-based acids to soften the stone surface, while other findings suggest the possible use of sound or vibration to facilitate the shaping process. The acoustic properties of Inca stonework reveal another aspect of geological sophistication. The walls of Sacsayhuamán and other Inca sites demonstrate remarkable acoustic properties, with certain areas designed to amplify or focus sound. The builders understood how andesite's density and structure would affect sound transmission, creating spaces where the natural properties of the stone enhanced human communication. These acoustic effects were not accidental, but were deliberately incorporated into the architectural design. As we delve deeper into the geological mysteries of ancient civilizations, we encounter evidence of knowledge and techniques that seem to transcend the limitations of their supposed technological capabilities. From the precise quarrying of granite in ancient Egypt to the sophisticated stone-fitting techniques of the Inca, these achievements suggest that ancient peoples possessed a profound understanding of geological processes and properties. The preservation of these ancient works in stone speaks to the enduring relationship between human civilization and the geological processes that shape our world. The limestone pillars of Göbekli Tepe, the volcanic tuff cities of Cappadocia, the granite monuments of Egypt, and the andesite walls of the Inca all represent attempts by ancient peoples to create permanent structures that would endure beyond the span of human generations. In choosing stone as their medium, these civilizations recognize that geology offers the closest thing to permanence that humans can achieve. Yet the geological mysteries extend beyond the technical achievements of ancient builders into the realm of the spiritual and symbolic. The choice of specific stones for sacred purposes, the orientation of monuments according to geological as well as astronomical principles, and the integration of natural geological features into religious and ceremonial architecture all suggest that ancient peoples saw in stone not just a building material, but a connection to the deeper processes that shape the earth. The crystal caves of Mexico, discovered in the year 2000 deep within the Naka mine, offer a glimpse into the geological processes that create the raw materials for human civilization. These caves, formed by hydrothermal activity deep within the earth, contain crystals of gypsum that dwarf human visitors. Some of these crystals are more than 10 meters long and weigh several tons, representing thousands of years of slow growth in the perfect geological conditions of the cave environment. The formation of these giant crystals required specific geological conditions, a source of mineral-rich water, stable temperatures, and the absence of disturbance over extended periods. The caves themselves were carved by the same hydrothermal processes that created the crystals. As hot, mineral-rich water dissolved the limestone bedrock and created the cavities where the crystals could grow. The result is a geological environment that seems to exist outside the normal parameters of human experience, where the slow processes of mineral formation create structures of incredible beauty and complexity ancient peoples were familiar with. Smaller versions of these geological processes, as evidenced by their use of crystals and mineral formations in sacred contexts. The crystal skulls of Mesoamerica, whether ancient or modern, represent an attempt to harness the supposed power of mineral formations for spiritual purposes. The builders of Stonehenge transported massive blocks of Preseli bluestone from Wales to England, a journey of more than 200 kilometers. Apparently because of the specific geological properties of this particular type of stone, the bluestone of Stonehenge, formed by volcanic activity in the Preseli Hills of Wales, possesses acoustic properties that may have been significant to its ancient builders. When struck, the stone produces a metallic ringing sound, leading some researchers to suggest that Stonehenge may have been designed as a kind of stone age musical instrument. The geological composition of the bluestone, rich in feldspar and other minerals, creates these acoustic properties while also giving the stone its distinctive appearance. The transportation of the bluestone represents one of the most remarkable feats of prehistoric engineering, moving stones weighing up to 4 tons across the challenging terrain of Bronze Age Britain required not just physical strength, but sophisticated knowledge of logistics and geology. The builders had to understand how different types of terrain would affect the transport of heavy loads, choosing routes that took advantage of geological features while avoiding areas where the underlying rock was too soft or unstable. The arrangement of the stones at Stonehenge demonstrates knowledge of both geological and astronomical principles. The builders recognized that the sarsen stones, formed from local sandstone, would provide a stable foundation for the monument, while the imported bluestone would serve specific acoustic and possibly spiritual functions. The precise positioning of the stones creates alignments with significant solar and lunar events, suggesting that the builders understood the relationship between terrestrial geology and celestial mechanics. The weathering patterns on the Stonehenge stones reveal information about the geological history of the site. The sarsen stones, composed of silica-cemented sand, have weathered relatively little over the millennia, while the bluestone shows more pronounced effects of erosion. This differential weathering pattern provides clues about the environmental conditions that have affected the site over the centuries, and may offer insights into the original appearance and function of the monument. Recent archaeological investigations at Stonehenge have revealed evidence of earlier wooden structures that may have preceded the stone monument. These wooden predecessors, constructed from local timber, demonstrate that the site was significant to ancient peoples long before the massive stones were erected. The transition from wood to stone represents not just a change in building materials, but a shift toward geological permanence, a desire to create structures that would endure beyond the lifespan of organic materials. The surrounding landscape of Stonehenge contains numerous other ancient monuments, many of which were positioned according to geological as well as astronomical principles. The Gosses, a massive earthwork that extends for more than 3 kilometers, follows the natural contours of the landscape while maintaining precise alignments with significant celestial events. The builders of these monuments understood that the underlying geology would affect the stability and longevity of their constructions, choosing locations where the bedrock was solid and the drainage was adequate. The chalk downlands of southern England, where Stonehenge and many other ancient monuments are located, represent a specific type of geological environment that was particularly suitable for prehistoric construction. The chalk bedrock formed from the compressed remains of marine organisms, provides a stable foundation that drains well and is relatively easy to excavate. The builders of Stonehenge and other monuments recognized these geological advantages and positioned their constructions accordingly. As we explore the deeper implications of geological mysteries in human history, we encounter questions that challenge our understanding of the relationship between ancient peoples and their environment. The sophisticated knowledge of stone properties demonstrated by ancient builders, the precise quarrying and transportation techniques, and the integration of geological features into sacred architecture all suggest that ancient civilizations possessed a level of geological understanding that may have been more advanced than we typically assume. The preservation of these ancient works in stone creates a permanent record of human achievement that transcends the limitations of written records. The geological evidence embedded in these monuments provides information about ancient techniques, environmental conditions, and cultural priorities that supplements and sometimes contradicts the historical record. The stones themselves become documents, preserving information about the people who shaped them and the geological processes that made their construction possible. The acoustic properties of ancient stone monuments reveal another dimension of geological knowledge that may have been more sophisticated than we realize. The builders of these structures understood how different types of stone would affect sound transmission and designed their monuments accordingly. The result is a series of structures that not only serve architectural and ceremonial functions, but also create specific acoustic environments that enhance human communication and spiritual experience. The orientation of ancient monuments according to geological principles, in addition to astronomical alignments, suggests that ancient peoples recognized the relationship between terrestrial and celestial forces. The positioning of structures to take advantage of natural geological features while maintaining alignment with significant celestial events demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of the interconnected nature of earth and sky. The use of specific types of stone for sacred purposes, often transported over great distances, suggests that ancient peoples attributed special properties to certain geological formations. The selection of particular stones for specific functions, based on their geological properties rather than simple availability, indicates that ancient builders possessed detailed knowledge of mineral characteristics and their effects on human experience that the geological mysteries of ancient civilizations continue to reveal new information about the capabilities and knowledge of our ancestors. As modern techniques for analyzing stone composition, tool marks, and construction techniques become more sophisticated, we gain new insights into the methods used by ancient builders and the geological knowledge that informed their work. These investigations often reveal evidence of techniques and capabilities that exceed what we might expect based on the supposed technological limitations of ancient civilizations. The preservation of ancient stone monuments in the geological record creates a unique opportunity for interdisciplinary research that combines archaeology, geology, and engineering. By studying the techniques used by ancient builders and the geological properties of the materials they used, we can gain insights into both the capabilities of ancient civilizations and the geological processes that shaped their environment. This research often reveals evidence of sophisticated knowledge and techniques that challenge our assumptions about the development of human civilization. The ongoing erosion and weathering of ancient stone monuments creates a sense of urgency about preserving and understanding these geological mysteries. As the effects of climate change and environmental degradation accelerate the weathering of stone surfaces, the evidence of ancient techniques and knowledge becomes increasingly fragile. The race to document and understand these geological mysteries before they are lost forever adds another dimension to the story of human interaction with the Earth's geological processes. The deep time perspective of geology, measured in millions and billions of years, provides a humbling context for human achievement. The stone monuments created by ancient civilizations, while impressive by human standards, represent only the most recent chapter in the Earth's geological history. Yet within this vast temporal framework, the ability of ancient peoples to understand and manipulate geological materials represents a remarkable achievement that speaks to the ingenuity and persistence of human civilization. As we prepare to delve even deeper into the geological mysteries that have shaped human history, we begin to see patterns that suggest ancient peoples possessed knowledge and techniques that may have been more sophisticated than we typically assume. The evidence preserved in stone monuments around the world speaks to a level of geological understanding that transcends simple trial and error, suggesting systematic knowledge that was passed down through generations of builders and craftsmen. The geological mysteries continue to unfold, each new discovery revealing additional layers of complexity in the relationship between ancient civilizations and their environment. From the underground cities carved into volcanic tuff to the massive stone monuments that still stand today, the evidence suggests that ancient peoples understood the Earth's geological processes in ways that we are only beginning to appreciate. The stones themselves become witnesses to this ancient knowledge, preserving in their mineral structure the evidence of techniques and capabilities that challenge our understanding of technological development. As we continue to study these geological mysteries, we gain not only insights into the past, but also perspectives on the relationship between human civilization and the natural world that may inform our future development. The underground chambers of Derinkuyu echo with the whispers of those who sought refuge in the Earth's embrace, their voices joining the eternal conversation between human ambition and geological patience. In the depths of volcanic tuff, where chisel marks still bear the fingerprints of ancient craftsmen, the stone remembers what time has forgotten, that true mastery lies not in conquering the Earth, but in understanding its ancient language of crystal and grain, pressure and time. The chambers beneath Derinkuyu exhaled their final secrets as the torchlight faded, leaving only the weight of stone and the whisper of ancient air. But the Earth holds deeper memories still, memories written not in carved symbols or painted walls, but in the very substance of ice and rock, in the layered testimony of sediment and the scarred face of countenance themselves. In the geological record there exists a chapter so dramatic, so catastrophic in its scope, that it reads like mythology made manifest. It is the story of the younger Dryas, a name that carries within it the sound of wind over tundra, of glaciers groaning as they advance, of a world suddenly plunged back into the grip of ice, after millennia of warming had promised spring. 12,800 years ago, as the last great ice age was loosening its hold on the northern continents, something changed. The warming that had been melting the continental ice sheets, that had been raising sea levels and allowing forests to reclaim the thawed ground, suddenly reversed. Within decades, geological heartbeat, the climate of the North Atlantic plunged back into near glacial conditions. The ice returned with a vengeance that lasted over 1,000 years. Scientists named this period for a small Arctic flower, the Dryas octopetala, whose pollen appears suddenly and abundantly in the sediment cores of northern Europe, marking the return of tundra conditions to lands that had briefly known temperate warmth. But the flower's delicate white petals belie the violence of the transition they commemorate. This was no gentle seasonal shift, no gradual cooling spread across centuries. This was climate catastrophe on a scale that defies easy comprehension. The mechanisms proposed to explain the younger Dryas read like chapters from a disaster novel written by the Earth itself. Some researchers point to the collapse of the North American ice sheets, particularly the massive Laurentide ice sheet that had covered much of what is now Canada and the northern United States. As these ice sheets melted, they held back vast lakes of glacial meltwater lakes, larger than all the Great Lakes combined. When the ice dams finally failed, these lakes emptied in torrents that would have dwarfed any flood in recorded human history. The meltwater, cold and fresh, poured into the North Atlantic with such volume and speed that it disrupted the very circulation of the ocean itself. The great conveyor belt of currents that carries warm water northward from the tropics, the same system that keeps northern Europe habitable today, ground to a halt. Without this warming influence, the climate of the entire North Atlantic region collapsed back into Ice Age conditions. But there is another theory, one that reads even more like mythology, the idea that the younger Dryas was triggered not by the simple mechanics of ice and water, but by fire from the sky. Evidence has been accumulating for what researchers call the younger Dryas impact hypothesis, the proposal that a comet or asteroid, or perhaps a shower of smaller objects, struck the Earth 12,800 years ago, triggering the climate reversal through a combination of direct impact effects and the disruption of ice sheet stability. The evidence for this cosmic catastrophe is written in subtle signatures scattered across the geological record. In sediment layers dating to the beginning of the younger Dryas, researchers have found elevated concentrations of platinum and other elements rare in terrestrial rocks but common in meteorites. They have discovered microscopic diamonds and other minerals that form only under the extreme pressures of cosmic impact. They have identified layers of carbon-rich material that may represent the remnants of continent-spanning wildfires ignited by the airburst of a fragmenting comet. If this hypothesis is correct, then the younger Dryas represents one of the most recent major cosmic catastrophes in Earth's history, an event that would have been witnessed by early human populations across much of the northern hemisphere. The implications are staggering. Entire continents set ablaze. Ice sheets destabilized by the shock waves, the sky itself seeming to fall in flames and debris. Consider what such an event would have meant to the small bands of hunters who had spread across the northern continents as the Ice Age waned. These were people who had developed sophisticated cultures adapted to the warming world of the late Pleistocene. They had learned to hunt the great herds of Megafaunal and giant bison, cave bears, and saber-toothed cats that roamed the steppes and grasslands. They had developed complex technologies for working stone and bone, for tracking game across vast distances, for surviving in landscapes that were challenging but rich with life. The cosmic impact and the climate reversal that followed would have shattered this world like glass. The great herds, stressed by rapidly changing climate and habitat loss, began their slide toward extinction. The mammoths, those living symbols of the Ice Age, disappeared from most of their range within centuries. The vast grasslands and parklands that had supported both human hunters and their prey transformed into tundra and boreal forest. Ecosystems that could support far fewer people. Those human populations that survived the initial catastrophe faced a world transformed beyond recognition. The advancing cold forced them southward, compressing populations into smaller and smaller refugia. Competition for resources intensified. Ancient migration routes became impassable as glaciers re-advanced and sea levels dropped. Cultural knowledge accumulated over generations was suddenly rendered obsolete as familiar landscapes disappeared beneath ice and snow. In the geological testimony of the younger Dryas, we find the origins of humanity's most persistent and powerful myths, the stories of great floods that appear in virtually every culture on Earth. These are not merely tales of local river flooding or coastal storms, but narratives of world-ending deluges that destroyed entire civilizations and forced the survivors to begin again from nothing. The story of Noah's flood is perhaps the most familiar to Western audiences, but it is only one voice in a global chorus of flood mythology. The Epic of Gilgamesh, carved into cuneiform tablets in ancient Mesopotamia, tells of Utnapishtim, who survived a flood sent by the gods to destroy humanity. Hindu texts speak of Manu, who built a great boat to preserve life through a universal deluge. Greek mythology tells of Deucalion and Pyrrha, the sole survivors of a flood sent by Zeus to cleanse the world of human corruption. Indigenous cultures around the world preserve their own flood traditions. The Hopi speak of the destruction of previous worlds by water. The Lakota tell of a great flood that covered all the land except the highest peaks. Australian Aboriginal peoples describe the rainbow serpent's power to flood the earth. From the Andes to the Arctic, from the Pacific Islands to the African highlands, cultures that had no contact with each other for thousands of years independently developed remarkably similar stories of catastrophic flooding for generations. Scholars explained these universal flood myths as arising from local experiences of river flooding or tsunami, elaborated through generations of oral tradition into tales of world destruction. But the geological evidence for the younger Dryas suggests a more literal interpretation. These myths may be cultural memories of actual global catastrophe, preserved through 12,000 years of retelling. The scale of the flooding associated with the end of the Ice Age was indeed biblical in its proportions. As the great ice sheets collapsed and the climate warmed out of the younger Dryas, sea levels rose by over 400 feet from their glacial maximum. Coastlines that had been home to human populations for millennia disappeared beneath the waves. Entire continental shelves, areas the size of modern nations, were submerged in the space of centuries. The flooding was not always gradual. The collapse of ice dams holding back glacial lakes produced floods of almost unimaginable scale. The Missoula floods, which carved the scablands of eastern Washington, involved the repeated emptying of glacial Lake Missoula, a body of water containing half the volume of Lake Michigan. Each time the ice dam failed, the lake emptied in a matter of days, sending walls of water hundreds of feet high racing across the landscape at speeds approaching 60 miles per hour. These floods carried icebergs the size of houses, boulders, weighing hundreds of tons, sediment loads that turned the water into liquid concrete. They carved canyons through solid basalt, created waterfalls that dwarfed Niagara, left behind landscape features so bizarre that geologists initially refused to believe they could have been created by water. The floods occurred repeatedly as the ice dam reformed and failed again, perhaps dozens of times over the centuries of the Ice Age's end. The Missoula floods were just one example of the cataclysmic flooding that marked the transition from ice age to modern climate. Similar megafloods carved the landscape of Siberia, when ice dams holding back the massive glacial lakes of Central Asia failed. The sudden draining of Lake Agassiz, a glacial lake that covered much of central North America, may have contributed to the younger Dryas cooling by disrupting Atlantic circulation. But perhaps the most spectacular of all these flood events was the catastrophic draining of the Black Sea, an event that may have occurred within human memory and could explain the remarkable consistency of flood mythology across cultures. Before the end of the Ice Age, the Black Sea was a freshwater lake, isolated from the Mediterranean by the land bridge of the Bosphorus. As global sea levels rose with the melting ice, the Mediterranean finally overtopped this barrier. What followed was a flood that reads like something from mythology. Mediterranean water poured through the breach in the Bosphorus with the force of 200 Niagara Falls, raising the level of the Black Sea by hundreds of feet and expanding its shoreline by thousands of square miles. Coastal settlements that had existed for generations were swept away in days. The salt water that poured in was denser than the fresh water it displaced, creating a stratified lake that remains partially anoxic to this day, a body of water where the deeper layers are literally lifeless, preserved in a state of chemical suspended animation. Archaeological evidence suggests that the shores of the pre-flood Black Sea were indeed inhabited by Neolithic farming communities. These were among the earliest agricultural societies in Europe, peoples who had begun the transition from hunting and gathering to settled farming that would ultimately give rise to civilization itself. The sudden flooding of their homeland would have scattered these populations across the surrounding regions, carrying with them the memory of a great deluge that destroyed their world. Some researchers have suggested that this event, occurring around 5600 BCE, could be the historical basis for the flood myths that appear in the earliest written literature of Mesopotamia and beyond. The survivors of the Black Sea deluge, spreading across the ancient Near East, would have brought with them not just the memory of catastrophic flooding, but the agricultural knowledge and technological innovations that helped fuel the rise of the first great civilizations. The geological record of the younger Dryas and its aftermath is written in a language of subtle signs and violent disruptions, readable to those who know how to decipher the testimony of sediment and ice. In the deep cores pulled from the Greenland ice sheet, each annual layer of snowfall preserved like the rings of an ancient tree, scientists can read the story of climate change year by year, sometimes season by season. The transition into the younger Dryas appears in these ice cores as a dramatic shift that occurred within decades, perhaps within a single generation. The chemical composition of the ice changes abruptly, reflecting the sudden cooling and the reorganization of atmospheric circulation patterns. Dust levels spike as expanding tundra and strengthening winds stripped topsoil from exposed landscapes. The very chemistry of the atmosphere is preserved in the trapped air bubbles, showing how the concentration of greenhouse gases shifted as ecosystems collapsed and reformed. But perhaps the most haunting signatures in the ice are the microscopic particles that speak of fire and devastation on a continental scale. In the layers corresponding to the beginning of the younger Dryas, researchers have found elevated concentrations of charcoal and other combustion products, suggesting that vast wildfires swept across North America and perhaps other continents as well. If the impact hypothesis is correct, these fires may have been ignited by the thermal radiation of objects exploding in the atmosphere, turning entire forests into infernos in a matter of hours. The sediment cores from lakes and bogs tell a complementary story of ecological catastrophe and recovery. Pollen records show the sudden disappearance of temperate tree species from much of northern Europe and their replacement by the hardy shrubs and grasses of tundra vegetation. In North America, The great spruce forests that had dominated the landscape during the earlier phases of deglaciation gave way to open parkland, and eventually to ice as glaciers re-advanced. The most dramatic testimony comes from the archaeological record itself, from the traces left by human populations struggling to adapt to a world transformed. The archaeological culture known as Clovis, which had spread across North America in the centuries before the Younger Dryas, disappeared almost entirely from the record. These were the people who hunted mammoths and other megafauna with their distinctive fluted spear points, who had developed sophisticated technologies for survival in the challenging but resource-rich environment of late Pleistocene. North America, the disappearance of Clovis culture coincides almost exactly with the beginning of the Younger Dryas and with the extinction of most North American megafauna. Mammoths, giant ground sloths, American horses and camels, short-faced bears, and dozens of other species vanished from the fossil record in what appears to be a concentrated extinction event. The relationship between climate change, human hunting, and megafaunal extinction remains one of the most contentious debates in archaeology. But the timing suggests that all three factors may have been linked in a cascade of ecological collapse. Human survivors of this catastrophe were forced to develop entirely new ways of life. The Folsom culture that emerged in the aftermath of Clovis represents a fundamental shift in hunting strategies and social organization. Unable to rely on the great herds of megafauna that had sustained their predecessors, Folsom peoples turned to bison hunting and developed new technologies and social systems adapted to tracking smaller, more mobile prey across vast distances. In other parts of the world, the transition was equally dramatic. In Europe, the Magdalenian culture, which had produced some of the finest cave paintings and portable art of the Paleolithic, disappeared as the advancing cold made their traditional hunting grounds uninhabitable. The reindeer herds that had formed the basis of their economy were pushed far to the south, and with them went the cultural traditions that had flourished in the Ice Age caves of France and Spain. The survivors who remained in the north were forced to adopt new strategies for survival in a landscape increasingly dominated by snow and ice. They developed new technologies for hunting in tundra environments, new forms of shelter adapted to extreme cold, new social organizations that could cope with the stress of resource scarcity and environmental unpredictability. But perhaps the most significant adaptation was cultural. The development of oral traditions that could preserve the memory of catastrophe across generations. In the face of environmental chaos that could make survival knowledge obsolete within a single lifetime, human societies developed elaborate systems of storytelling that could encode not just practical information about hunting and gathering, but cosmological frameworks for understanding and coping with radical environmental change. These oral traditions became the repositories of deep ecological memory, preserving not just the facts of past environmental changes, but the emotional and spiritual responses that such changes evoked. The flood myths that appear in cultures around the world may represent the oldest continuously transmitted stories in human history. Narratives that have been refined and retold across 400 generations since the end of the last ice age. As the climate gradually warmed out of the Younger Dryas around 11,700 years ago, the survivors of the Great Catastrophe faced a world that was both familiar and utterly changed. The ice sheets that had re-advanced during the cold period began their final retreat, but the landscape they revealed bore the scars of repeated glaciation and massive flooding. This was a geography written in the language of catastrophe, where every valley and ridge told a story of ice and water, of advance and retreat, of destruction and renewal. The process of deglaciation itself created landscapes of almost surreal beauty and strangeness. As the ice sheets retreated, they left behind moraines, vast piles of rocks and sediment that marked the farthest advance of the glaciers, like geological tombstones. These moraines formed natural dams that created thousands of new lakes, transforming drainage patterns that had been stable for millions of years. Some of these glacial lakes were temporary features, lasting only until their ice or sediment dams were breached by rising water levels. When they failed, they produced floods that carved new river channels and left behind landscapes of almost alien appearance. The channeled scablands of eastern Washington, carved by the repeated Missoula floods, present a terrain so bizarre that the first geologists to study them could not believe that water alone could have created such features. Other glacial lakes persisted to become permanent features of the post-glacial landscape. The Great Lakes of North America are perhaps the most spectacular example, but similar systems appeared around the world wherever retreating ice sheets left behind basins deep enough to hold water. These lakes became oases of life in landscapes that were otherwise slow to recover from the devastation of the Ice Age. The new lakes were not just geographical features, they became focal points for human recadify of the deglaciated landscape. Their shores provided diverse habitats that could support both aquatic and terrestrial resources, making them ideal locations for hunter-gatherer populations adapting to post-glacial conditions. Archaeological sites around glacial lakes often show continuous occupation from the earliest post-glacial period through to the development of agriculture and settled life. As vegetation slowly recolonized the barren landscapes left by retreating ice, it created a succession of ecosystems that reflected the changing climate. The first colonists were often hardy tundra species, mosses and lichens, dwarf willows and birches that could survive on thin soils and tolerate harsh conditions. These pioneer communities gradually modified the environment, building soil, organic matter, and creating microclimates that could support more complex plant communities. The progression from tundra to forest was not uniform or steady. Climate fluctuations, even minor ones by geological standards, could halt or reverse the process of ecological succession. Volcanic eruptions, which became more frequent as the weight of ice was removed from the landscape, could temporarily devastate recovering ecosystems. The process of recovery was marked by false starts and setbacks, by rapid changes and long periods of apparent stasis. For human populations trying to make sense of this changing world, the landscape itself must have seemed alive with intention and meaning. The sudden appearance of new lakes, the retreat and advance of vegetation lines, the changing behavior of animal populations, of these changes would have demanded explanation within the cosmological frameworks that helped people understand their place in the world. Many indigenous traditions speak of the landscape as bearing the marks of great battles between spiritual forces, of the earth itself as a participant in cosmic struggles between order and chaos, creation and destruction. These traditions often identify specific landscape features: unusual rock formations, mysterious lakes, anomalous river channels, as the sites where these cosmic battles took place. In light of what we now know about the geological violence of the late Pleistocene, such traditions may preserve remarkably accurate observations about landscape formation. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia speak of the Dreamtime, a period when ancestral beings moved across the landscape, creating mountains and valleys, rivers and waterholes, through their actions and interactions. The stories of these dreamtime journeys serve as maps of the landscape, encoding practical information about water sources and seasonal resources. But they also provide explanatory frameworks for understanding why the landscape appears as it does. Similar traditions appear around the world wherever indigenous peoples have maintained continuous occupation of landscapes, shaped by late Pleistocene geological processes. The Native American peoples of the Pacific Northwest have detailed oral histories of the formation of landscape features that we now know were created by catastrophic flooding during deglaciation. These stories often contain remarkably accurate information about the timing and scale of geological events, information that has been preserved and transmitted across hundreds of generations. The accuracy of such oral traditions has led some researchers to suggest that they may preserve actual eyewitness accounts of major geological events passed down through cultural memory across thousands of years. If this is the case, then these traditions represent one of the oldest forms of scientific observation, predating written records by millennia and preserving information about Earth processes that would otherwise be lost to history. Beneath the surface drama of floods and climate catastrophe, the geological record of the late Pleistocene reveals patterns that operate on even deeper timescale cycles of change that dwarf human history, and yet somehow seem to pulse with a rhythm that human consciousness can almost grasp. These are the Milankovitch cycles, named for the Serbian mathematician who first calculated how subtle changes in Earth's orbit and rotation affect the amount and distribution of solar energy reaching the planet's surface. The mathematics of these cycles is elegant in its simplicity, but their effects on Earth's climate system are profound and complex. Over periods of roughly 100,000 years, Earth's orbit shifts from nearly circular to more elliptical and back again, changing the total amount of solar energy the planet receives. Over 41,000-year cycles, the tilt of Earth's rotational axis varies, affecting how that energy is distributed between the poles and the equator. Over 23,000-year cycles, the timing of the seasons shifts relative to Earth's position in its orbit, determining whether northern hemisphere summers occur when Earth is closest to or farthest from the Sun. These cycles combine in complex ways to drive the alternation between glacial and interglacial periods that has characterized Earth's climate for the past several million years. When the cycles align to reduce summer solar energy in the northern hemisphere, snow begins to accumulate year-round on the high plateaus of northern Canada and Scandinavia. The white surface of this snow reflects more solar energy back to space, cooling the climate further and allowing the snow to persist and thicken into ice. Once begun, the process of glaciation feeds on itself through a cascade of positive feedback mechanisms. The growing ice sheets reflect more sunlight, cooling the planet further. Lower temperatures reduce the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere, weakening the greenhouse effect. The weight of the ice depresses the land surface, creating basins that can hold even thicker accumulations of ice. Ocean levels drop as more water is locked up in continental ice sheets, exposing new land surfaces that can be covered by reflective snow. The ice age cycles that these processes create operate on timescales that challenge human comprehension. The most recent glacial cycle began roughly 120,000 years ago and reached its maximum extent only 20,000 years ago. During this peak, ice sheets up to 2 miles thick covered most of Canada, the northern United States, Scandinavia, and much of northern Europe and Asia. Sea levels dropped by 400 feet, exposing vast continental shelves and creating land bridges between continents. The world of the glacial maximum was so different from the modern Earth that it might as well have been an alien planet. Where New York City now stands, there was ice a mile thick. The Mediterranean was a series of smaller, isolated seas. The English Channel was dry land, and what is now the North Sea was a vast plain crossed by rivers. The Amazon rainforest was reduced to small refugia, surrounded by grassland and scrub. The Sahara was even more arid than today, a barrier of sand and rock that stretched from the Atlantic to the Red Sea. Yet even at the height of the Ice Age, humans were spreading across this transformed planet, adapting to conditions that would challenge the most sophisticated modern survival technologies. They learned to hunt mammoths on the wind-swept steppes of Siberia, to find shelter in the caves and overhangs of Ice Age Europe, to navigate by stars across landscapes of almost unimaginable scale and emptiness. The end of this glacial cycle, beginning around 19,000 years ago, was not a simple reversal of the cooling process. The deglaciation was marked by rapid climate oscillations, periods of warming interrupted by sudden returns to near-glacial conditions. The younger Dryas was just one of these oscillations, though perhaps the most dramatic. Each shift brought new challenges for both human populations and the ecosystems they depended on. What makes the late Pleistocene geological record so remarkable is not just the scale of the changes it documents, but the speed with which some of these changes occurred. Ice cores from Greenland show that regional temperatures could shift by 10 degrees Celsius or more in periods as short as a few decades. Such rapid changes would have been clearly visible within human lifetimes, transforming familiar landscapes into unrecognizable environments and forcing constant adaptation. The human response to these rapid environmental changes may have been one of the driving forces behind the development of complex culture itself. Populations facing unpredictable environmental conditions would have had strong incentives to develop flexible technologies, diverse resource strategies, and sophisticated systems for sharing information across time and space. The elaborate oral traditions, artistic expressions, and ritual practices that characterize late Pleistocene human cultures may represent adaptive responses to the challenge of surviving in a rapidly changing world. Archaeological evidence suggests that some of the most significant innovations in human technology and social organization coincided with periods of rapid climate change. The development of blade tool technologies, the emergence of symbolic art and personal ornamentation, the spread of long-distance trade networks, all of these innovations appear in the archaeological record during periods of environmental instability and change. The relationship between geological change and cultural evolution suggests that human consciousness itself may have been shaped by the experience of living through rapid environmental transitions. The capacity for long-term planning, for abstract thought, for creating meaning systems that could provide stability in the face of constant change. These distinctively human capabilities may have evolved in response to the geological dynamism of the late Pleistocene, as the great ice sheets made their final retreat and the climate stabilized. Into the relatively benign conditions of the Holocene, human societies began the transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture and settled life. This transition, which began independently in several parts of the world around 11,000 years ago, marked the beginning of what we call civilization. But the geological memories of the Ice Age did not disappear with the ice itself. They were preserved in the landscape, in oral traditions, and in the deep structures of human consciousness. The earliest agricultural societies developed in regions that had been refugia during the glacial maximum areas, where favorable climate conditions had persisted. Even during the coldest periods of the Ice Age, the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, the river valleys of China, the highlands of Mesoamerica, and the Andes were all regions where complex ecosystems had survived the Ice Age relatively intact, and where the early warming of the Holocene created ideal conditions for the development of agriculture. But these early farming societies inherited landscapes that bore the deep scars of glacial processes. The fertile river valleys where agriculture first developed had been carved by glacial floods and filled with sediments washed from melting ice sheets. The terraced hillsides that provided well-drained soils for early crops had been sculpted by freeze-thaw cycles and glacial erosion, even in regions far from the ice sheets themselves. The legacy of the Ice Age was written in the topography that shaped human settlement patterns. More subtly, the psychological legacy of the Ice Age continued to influence human culture long after the environmental conditions that created it had disappeared. The flood myths that appear in virtually all early civilizations may be cultural memories of actual geological events, but they also reflect deeper psychological patterns shaped by the experience of environmental catastrophe. The persistent human fascination with apocalyptic scenarios, with stories of world destruction and renewal, may reflect neural pathways carved by generations of ancestors who survived repeated environmental crises. Archaeological evidence from early agricultural sites often shows evidence of what researchers call catastrophic thinking, the tendency to prepare for environmental disasters that exceed anything in living memory. Many early farming societies built elaborate storage systems designed to survive multi-year droughts or floods. They developed agricultural techniques that prioritized resilience over maximum yield, maintaining diverse crop varieties that could survive different environmental stresses. These practices make sense as adaptations to the environmental instability that characterized the transition from Ice Age to Holocene conditions. But they may also reflect cultural memories of even greater catastrophes. The elaborate flood control systems built by early Mesopotamian civilizations, for example, seem designed to cope with floods far larger than any recorded in historical times. Similarly, the agricultural terraces built by Andean civilizations could withstand erosion events of almost geological proportions. The monumental architecture that emerged with early civilizations also bears traces of geological thinking. The pyramids of Egypt, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the temple complexes of Mesoamerica, these structures were built not just to last for human generations, but to survive on geological timescales. Their massive stone construction, their orientation to astronomical phenomena, their symbolic representation of cosmic order, of these features suggest builders who were thinking in terms of deep time and cosmic cycles. Some researchers have suggested that the obsession with permanence that characterizes early monumental architecture reflects a cultural memory of impermanence, a deep awareness that even the most stable human institutions could be swept away by forces beyond human control. The builders of these monuments may have been creating physical anchors for cultural memory, structures that could preserve important information even if the societies that created them disappeared. The astronomical orientations built into many ancient monuments may reflect this same deep time perspective by aligning their structures with the movements of celestial bodies. Ancient builders created calendars in stone that could function for thousands of years without human maintenance. These astronomical alignments served practical purposes. helping to regulate agricultural cycles and religious observances. But they also connected human activities to cosmic rhythms that operate on timescales far longer than individual human lives. The symbolic systems that developed alongside monumental architecture show similar evidence of geological thinking. The cosmologies of early civilizations often described the world as subject to periodic destruction and renewal, with human history divided into great ages separated by catastrophic transitions. These mythological systems provided frameworks for understanding environmental change that drew on deep cultural memories of actual geological events. The Hindu concept of cosmic cycles, with its vast periods of creation and destruction stretching across millions of years, may reflect this geological perspective. Similarly, the Mayan long count calendar, with its cycles within cycles extending across thousands of years, suggests a culture deeply attuned to processes operating on timescales far beyond immediate human experience. Even in the historical period, when written records began to supplement oral traditions, geological events continued to shape human consciousness in profound ways. The eruption of Vesuvius in 79 CE, which destroyed Pompeii and Herculaneum, provided a vivid demonstration of geological forces that could overwhelm human civilization in a matter of hours. The eyewitness account, written by Pliny the Younger, describes not just the physical details of the eruption but the psychological impact of witnessing the sudden transformation of a familiar landscape into something alien and deadly. Similar events throughout history. The Lisbon earthquake of 1755, the eruption of Krakatoa in 1883, the Tunguska event of 1908, served as reminders that the apparently stable surface of the Earth conceals forces of almost unimaginable power. Each of these events generated new waves of cultural reflection on humanity's relationship to geological processes, producing everything from scientific investigations to religious movements to artistic expressions of the sublime terror of natural forces. But perhaps the most profound legacy of the Ice Age geological record lies not in any specific cultural memory or architectural achievement, but in the deep structure of human consciousness itself. The capacity for long-term thinking, for imagining futures radically different from the present, for creating meaning systems that can provide stability in the face of constant change. These may be the most important adaptations that emerged from humanity's encounter with late Pleistocene geological dynamism, the human ability to think in terms of deep time, to imagine processes operating across scales from minutes to millennia, may have evolved as a response to living in a world where rapid environmental change was the norm rather than the exception. This capacity for temporal perspective taking has become one of the defining characteristics of human cognition, enabling everything from agricultural planning to scientific investigation to artistic expression. As the final echoes of the Ice Age floods faded into geological silence, and the last mammoths disappeared into the warming landscapes of the early Holocene, they left behind something more enduring than any individual species or ecosystem. They left behind a human consciousness shaped by deep time, attuned to the slow rhythms of geological change, and capable of imagining futures that extend far beyond the immediate horizon of daily experience. This consciousness would prove to be one of humanity's greatest gifts as the species began its expansion across the post-glacial world. In the fertile valleys and emerging forests of the Holocene, human societies would build the first cities, develop the first writing systems, and begin the long journey toward understanding their place in the cosmos. But even in their most sophisticated achievements, They would carry within them the geological memories of the Ice Age, the deep awareness that the Earth itself is alive with forces that dwarf human ambition, yet somehow remain comprehensible to human imagination. The story of the younger Dryas and the Great Deglaciation does not end with the stabilization of the Holocene climate. It continues in every flood myth, every monumental structure, every human attempt to understand the relationship between stability and change, between the immediate concerns of daily life and the vast processes that shape the world over geological time. In learning to read the signatures of catastrophe preserved in ice and sediment, in stone and story, we reconnect with this deepest layer of human experience, the awareness that we are participants in processes that began long before our species existed and will continue long after we are gone. The sun beats relentlessly against limestone cliffs, and ancient winds carry whispers of forgotten time. Lies a chamber that defies human understanding. The cave of crystals, discovered by miners seeking silver and zinc in the year 2000, revealed a secret that Earth had been growing in silence for over 500,000 years. Here, in darkness, absolute and heat that would steal breath from lungs, selenite crystals grew to impossible dimensions, some reaching 36 feet in length. Pillars of translucent white that catch and bend light like captured moonbeams, creating a cathedral not built by human hands, but grown by the patient alchemy of time itself. The miners who first broke through the wall spoke of stepping into another world, a place where physics seemed suspended and beauty transcended all earthly reference. The crystals, some weighing as much as 55 tons, had formed in water so hot it could cook flesh, in chambers where only the most extremophile bacteria could survive. Yet in this hostile realm, Earth had crafted something so beautiful that those who witnessed it wept not from the heat, but from the overwhelming sense of standing in the presence of geological time made manifest. The discovery echoed through scientific communities like a bell tolling in an ancient cathedral. Here was proof of Earth's capacity for creating wonder in the most unlikely places, of the planet's ability to spend millennia crafting beauty that no eye might ever witness. The cave existed at the intersection of the possible and the miraculous, where mineral-rich water, maintained at precisely 58 degrees Celsius for hundreds of thousands of years, had allowed gypsum to grow into these magnificent columns. But the crystal cave was more than a geological curiosity, it was a time capsule, a record of Earth's deep patience and the delicate conditions that allow wonder to flourish. The crystals had grown in the Goldilocks zone of mineral formation, where temperature and chemistry existed in perfect balance. Too hot, and the crystals would dissolve. Too cool, and they would never have achieved such monumental size. The cave represented Earth's ability to maintain impossible precision across geological timescales. Indigenous peoples of the region had long spoken of sacred chambers beneath the earth, places where the spirits of stone dwelled, and where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds grew thin. Their legends spoke of caves that sang, of stones that held memory, of chambers where time moved differently than on the surface. The discovery of the crystal cave seemed to validate these ancient stories, suggesting that human intuition had long sensed the presence of something extraordinary hidden in the deep places of the world. Across continents and centuries, human civilizations have been drawn to the deep places of Earth with an urgency that transcends mere survival. From the copper mines of ancient Cyprus to the turquoise excavations of the American Southwest, from the salt chambers beneath Poland to the jade quarries of Neolithic China, Our ancestors descended into darkness, seeking more than mere minerals. They sought connection with the living rock itself, in the mountains of Austria. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of salt mining that stretches back over 4,000 years, operations so sophisticated they required entire communities to maintain. The Hallstatt culture, named for this ancient salt mining region, developed not just techniques for extracting salt, but entire belief systems centered around their relationship with the underground realm. They buried their dead with salt, believing it would preserve the soul as it preserved the body. They carved figurines from the rock salt they extracted, creating art from the very substance that sustained their civilization. The miners themselves were a priestly class, initiates into mysteries that only those who spent their lives in the deep places could understand. They developed their own dialect, their own rituals, their own understanding of the geological forces that shaped their world. They could read the rock-like text, interpreting the layers and colors and textures to predict where the richest veins might be found. They understood the breathing of caves, the way air moved through underground chambers, the signs that warned of cave-ins or gas pockets in Peru. The ancient cultures that preceded the Inca developed mining techniques so advanced that modern engineers struggle to understand how they achieved such precision. The Cerro Rico mountain, rich in silver, showed evidence of pre-Columbian mining that penetrated deep into the mountain's heart. The miners carved ventilation shafts with mathematical precision, created drainage systems that channeled water away from working areas, and developed extraction methods that maximized yield, while minimizing structural damage to the mountain itself. These ancient miners understood something that modern extraction industries have largely forgotten, that mining was not merely about taking from the earth, but about entering into relationship with it. They performed rituals before breaking new ground, left offerings in completed chambers, and maintained taboos about certain areas that were considered too sacred to disturb. They recognized that the earth was alive, that it had moods and preferences, and that successful mining required not conquest, but negotiation. The Japanese have a word, tsukumogami, describing objects that acquire souls after existing for 100 years. Ancient miners seemed to understand this concept intuitively, recognizing that stones and minerals, having existed for millions of years, possessed a kind of consciousness that demanded respect. They developed elaborate rituals for appeasing the spirits of the mine, for asking permission before extracting, or for honoring the sacrifice of the mountain that gave up its treasures. In the limestone caves of Derbyshire, England, where water has carved chambers and passages through rock, over millions of years, archaeologists have discovered something that challenges our understanding of both geology and human prehistory. The caves ring like bells when struck, producing pure, resonant tones that carry through the underground chambers with crystalline clarity. But these are not random. Acoustic properties analysis reveals that ancient peoples deliberately shaped certain cave formations to enhance their musical qualities, creating the world's first concert halls deep beneath the earth. The phenomenon of singing stones appears in cultures across the globe, from the ringing rocks of Pennsylvania to the musical stones of Skiddaw in England's Lake District. These geological formations produce tones when struck, creating natural lithophonic orchestras that our ancestors discovered and celebrated. At some sites, where patterns on the stones reveal centuries of human use, suggesting that these natural instruments were central to ancient religious and cultural practices. The physics behind singing stones reveals the intricate relationship between geology and acoustics. The rocks must have the precise combination of mineral composition, internal structure, and weathering to produce clear tones. Iron-rich rocks often sing most sweetly, their high metal content creating resonant frequencies that can carry for miles. Ancient peoples seemed to understand these properties intuitively, using singing stones to communicate across distances, to mark sacred sites, and to create musical performances that connected human creativity with the voice of the earth itself. In Vietnam's Halong Bay, local legends speak of dragons whose voices became trapped in the limestone formations, causing the rocks to sing when the wind passes through their cavities. Scientific analysis reveals that these formations do indeed create harmonic resonances, producing haunting melodies that change with weather patterns and tidal flows. The ancient peoples who lived among these singing stones developed a sophisticated understanding of how geological formations could be used to create music, architecture, and spiritual experiences. The tradition of stone music continues in many cultures today. In India, the Yal Tarang uses carefully tuned bowls of water to create melodic scales, while ancient Tamil literature describes entire orchestras created from specially selected stones. These practices suggest a deep understanding of the relationship between mineral composition, shape, and acoustic properties knowledge that was passed down through generations of stone musicians who understood that the earth itself was capable of song. Perhaps most remarkably, recent research has revealed that certain cave systems naturally amplify and modulate sound in ways that enhance human vocal resonance. These chambers, many showing evidence of ancient use, seem to have been selected by prehistoric peoples specifically for their acoustic properties. The caves enhanced not just the volume, but the emotional impact of human voices, creating spiritual experiences that connected the singers with the deep resonance of the earth itself. In the Orkney Islands, where Atlantic storms have battered the coastline for millennia, archaeologists discovered something that changed our understanding of stone. Age sophistication. Skara Brae, older than Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids, revealed a Neolithic society that had developed advanced techniques for working with stone, not just as building material, but as a medium for preserving memory across generations. The builders of Skara Brae understood stone in ways that modern architects are only beginning to appreciate. They selected different types of rock for different purposes, using harder stones for structural elements and softer stones for decorative work. They understood how different stones weathered, how they responded to temperature changes, how they interacted with moisture and salt air. Most remarkably, they seemed to understand that certain stones could preserve information over vast periods of time. The stone furniture of Skara Brae beds, shelves, seats carved directly from bedrock, presented more than mere functionality. These were memory objects, pieces of living rock shaped to hold not just physical objects, but the accumulated experience of the community. The wear patterns on these stone furnishings tell stories of daily life, of hands that touched the same surfaces for generations, of a people who understood that stone could serve as a bridge between past and future. Recent research has revealed that the builders of Skara Brae incorporated quartz crystals into their stone constructions, not as decoration, but as functional elements that may have served to preserve or transmit information. Quartz, with its piezoelectric properties, can store and release electrical energy when subjected to pressure. Ancient peoples may have understood this property intuitively, using quartz-bearing stones as natural memory devices that could hold and release information across generations. The concept of stones as memory keepers appears in cultures worldwide. Australian Aboriginal peoples speak of songlines, invisible pathways across the land that are marked by stones and rock formations, each holding part of the creation story. These stone markers serve as libraries, encoding navigation information, seasonal knowledge, and spiritual teachings in their placement and properties. The stones remember not just their own geological history, but the human stories that have been entrusted to them in Peru. The massive stone constructions at Sacsayhuamán demonstrate an understanding of stone that goes beyond mere engineering. The precisely fitted stones, some weighing over 100 tons, were shaped without mortar using techniques that remain mysterious. But analysis of the construction reveals something more than architectural skill the builders seem to have understood: the stress patterns and load-bearing properties of different types of stone, creating structures that could not only withstand earthquakes, but actually become stronger during seismic events. The Inca spoke of stones as living beings, entities that could be awakened, that could remember and respond to human touch. They described techniques for softening stone, making it malleable enough to shape by hand. While such descriptions were long dismissed as mythology, recent experiments have suggested that certain sound frequencies can indeed alter the molecular structure of stone, making it temporarily more workable. Perhaps the ancient builders possessed acoustic techniques for stoneworking that have been lost to modern knowledge. High in the Himalayas, where the Earth's crust folds and buckles under the relentless pressure of continental collision, Tibetan miners have for centuries extracted a substance they call the tears of mountains. Salt deposits formed in ancient seabeds now thrust high above the clouds. These salt formations, sometimes tinted pink or blue by trace minerals, represent one of the most poetic intersections of geological time and human culture. The salt mines of Tibet tell a story that spans hundreds of millions of years, from the time when the land that would become the Himalayas lay beneath warm, tropical seas. As the mountains rose, these ancient sea deposits were lifted into the sky, creating salt formations at altitudes where the air is so thin that each breath is a conscious effort. The miners who work these high-altitude deposits move slowly, reverently, understanding that they are harvesting the preserved tears of an ancient ocean. Tibetan tradition holds that these salts possess healing properties that go beyond their mineral content. They believe that salt, formed under such extreme geological conditions, carries the memory of the Earth's transformation, holding within its crystalline structure the story of how mountains are born. Modern analysis has revealed that these high-altitude salts do indeed contain trace elements not found in sea-level deposits, minerals that were concentrated and transformed by the intense pressures and temperatures of mountain building. The mining of mountain salt requires techniques passed down through generations, knowledge that encompasses not just the practical aspects of extraction, but the spiritual protocols for working with such ancient material. Miners perform rituals before entering new salt chambers, acknowledging the sacrifice of the mountain that gives up its treasures. They harvest only what they need, leaving portions untouched as offerings to the spirits of the stone. Similar practices appear in the salt mines of Pakistan, where the Kura salt mine, one of the world's oldest and largest, has been worked. For over 1,000 years, the mine, carved from a salt range that formed when an ancient sea evaporated, contains salt in colors ranging from pure white to deep red, each hue representing different geological epochs and mineral compositions. The miners speak of being able to taste time in the different salt layers, each stratum carrying the flavor of a different era in Earth's history. In Poland's Wieleczka salt mine, carved chambers have been transformed into underground cathedrals, their walls and ceilings sculpted from solid salt into religious iconography. The mine, worked continuously for over 700 years, represents one of humanity's longest ongoing relationships with a single geological formation. The miners, generation after generation, have not just extracted salt, but created art, transforming the mine into a subterranean city where geology and human creativity merge into something transcendent. The salt miners of Geological developed their own mythology around their work, stories that explained the origin of the salt deposits and the relationship between the miners and the underground realm. They spoke of Saint Kinga, who threw her engagement ring into a salt mine in Hungary and miraculously found it in the Polish salt deposits, blessing the mine with both prosperity and protection. These stories, passed down through generations of miners, represent more than folklore. They encode practical knowledge about mining safety, geological conditions, and the psychological techniques needed to spend one's life working in the deep places of the earth. Recent research has revealed that salt mines create unique environmental conditions that affect human consciousness. The negative ion concentration in salt mines can induce states of relaxation and heightened awareness, possibly explaining why many ancient cultures associated salt mining with spiritual practice. The miners themselves reported dreams that seemed more vivid, meditative states that came more easily, and a sense of connection with geological time that was difficult to achieve on the surface. In the mountains of Colorado, where ancient volcanic activity left deposits of rare minerals scattered through granite formations, Native American peoples developed mining and metallurgy techniques that modern science is only beginning to understand. They extracted and worked with metals that shouldn't have been accessible to prehistoric technology, creating alloys and artifacts that suggest knowledge of chemistry and materials, science that seems impossibly advanced for their time period. The mystery deepens when we examine the tools found at these ancient mining sites. Hammerstones show where patterns consistent with precision work on the hardest minerals, while mining shafts penetrate deep into solid rock with engineering precision that rivals modern excavation techniques. Yet no evidence exists of the advanced tools that such work would seem to require. The miners appear to have achieved their results through methods that remain completely mysterious to contemporary archaeology. Native American oral traditions speak of techniques for singing to the stone, of using sound and vibration to make hard rock more workable. They describe rituals performed before mining, ceremonies that were said to awaken the cooperation of the stone spirits. While such descriptions were long dismissed as mythology, recent experiments in sonic drilling and vibration-assisted cutting have revealed that certain frequencies can indeed alter the properties of stone, making it easier to work with traditional tools. The Hopi people speak of their ancestors as having knowledge of the Earth's deep processes, understanding how minerals formed and how they could be persuaded to reveal their secrets. Their creation stories describe a time when the boundary between human consciousness and geological processes was more permeable, when people could communicate directly with the intelligence they perceived in stone and metal. These stories, preserved across thousands of years, may encode practical knowledge about geology and mining that was disguised as spiritual teaching. In the Amazon Basin, where Spanish conquistadors reported finding gold work of impossible fineness and complexity, indigenous peoples had developed techniques for working with metals that left no evidence of the processes used. They created gold objects so thin they were translucent, alloys that combined metals in proportions that shouldn't have been achievable without industrial equipment, and artifacts that showed no tool marks despite being fashioned from the hardest materials. The pre-Columbian metalworkers of South America understood something about the relationship between consciousness and matter that modern science is only beginning to explore. They spoke of metals as having personalities, of gold as being the flesh of the sun god, of silver as carrying the coolness of the moon. Their working techniques were inseparable from their spiritual practices, suggesting an approach to material science that integrated physical and metaphysical understanding. Recent analysis of pre-Columbian goldwork has revealed that shouldn't exist in gold worked with traditional techniques. The metal shows signs of having been manipulated at the molecular level, with crystal formations that suggest the use of processes unknown to modern metallurgy. Some researchers have suggested that the ancient metalworkers possessed knowledge of quantum effects, understanding how consciousness and intention could influence material properties at the subatomic level. The mystery extends to the mining sites themselves, where excavations show evidence of techniques that seem to violate our understanding of what was possible with prehistoric technology. Some mines show signs of having been carved with tools that left surfaces smoother than modern diamond cutting equipment can achieve. Others show evidence of excavation techniques that extracted specific minerals while leaving surrounding rock completely undisturbed, suggesting precision that exceeds current industrial capabilities. Perhaps most puzzling are the abandoned mines that show no evidence of the extracted material. Massive excavations were clearly undertaken. Tons of rock were removed, but no corresponding accumulation of waste material can be found. It's as if the miners possessed techniques for returning processed rock to the earth, for healing the wounds they created in their extraction process. These sites suggest an approach to mining that was more like surgery than excavation, removing only what was needed while preserving the integrity of the geological formation. In the deepest chambers, where crystals grow like prayers made visible, where ancient miners carved their devotion into living stone, we find the intersection of human longing and geological time, a place where the Earth's patience meets our urgent need to understand our place in the vast story written in rock and mineral, and the slow breathing of stone. The crystal chambers lie in darkness now, their treasures preserved behind sealed doors, while the miners who discovered them grow old, with the memory of beauty that transcended human understanding. The ancient salt mines echo with the footsteps of generations who found the sacred in the deep places, who understood that to work with stone was to participate in geological time itself. And in the mountains where rare minerals still wait in darkness, the earth continues its patient alchemy, growing beauty in places where no eye will witness it, keeping faith with the possibility that someday someone will break through the wall and stand amazed in the presence of wonder that took millennia to create. The ancient basalt whispers grew fainter as the ceremonies ended, but their echo lingered in the crystalline chambers, reverberating through stone corridors that had witnessed the birth and death of civilizations. Time itself seemed to pool in these sacred spaces, collecting like water in stone basins, holding the memories of every footstep, every prayer, every moment of human recognition that the earth was more than mere rock and soil. It was a living repository of consciousness, a keeper of secrets that transcended the brief flicker of mortal understanding. In the highlands of Peru, where the air grows thin and the boundary between earth and sky blurs into crystalline clarity, stand the mysterious stone formations of Sacsayhuamán. These are not merely the remains of an Incan fortress, though that is how history has chosen to remember them. They are something far more ancient, far more profound. They are the memory keepers, stones that have been watching and recording for millennia before the first human footprint pressed into the mountain soil. The massive stones, some weighing more than 200 tons, fit together with a precision that seems to mock human understanding of engineering. No mortar binds them, yet they have withstood centuries of earthquakes that have leveled entire cities built with modern techniques. Local legend speaks of these stones as living entities, capable of softening and reforming themselves, responding to the touch of those who knew the ancient songs, the forgotten frequencies that could make granite flow like water. Carlos, a modern-day keeper of Quechua traditions, runs his weathered hand along the seamless joints between massive blocks. His grandfather taught him that these stones were not cut by human tools, but were shaped by sound, specific tones and rhythms that could alter the molecular structure of rock itself. The ancestors knew that stone is not silent, he explains, his voice barely above a whisper. It hums with the frequency of the earth's heart. When you match that frequency, when you sing with the stone's own song, it becomes soft as clay in your hands. Modern acoustics research has discovered something remarkable about these ancient sites. The stone formations at Sacsayhuamán, like those at Stonehenge, the pyramids of Giza, and countless other megalithic sites around the world, were designed to resonate at specific frequencies. These frequencies, often between 95 and 120 Hz, to the natural resonant frequency of the human brain in deep meditative states. They also match frequencies found in the Earth's own electromagnetic field, the Schumann resonances that pulse through our planet's atmosphere like a vast, slow heartbeat. Could it be that these ancient stone circles and megalithic structures were not just temples or astronomical observatories, but something far more sophisticated, consciousness amplifiers, devices designed to harmonize human awareness with the deeper rhythms of the planet itself? The geological evidence suggests that our ancestors understood something about the relationship between stone, sound, and consciousness that we are only beginning to rediscover. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a geologist who has spent decades studying the acoustic properties of ancient stone structures, believes that these sites were part of a global network of consciousness-enhancing monuments. When you analyze the geological composition of these megaliths, she explains, you find that they were almost always constructed from stones with high quartz content. Quartz is piezoelectric. It generates electrical current when subjected to pressure or vibration. These ancient builders weren't just working with dead stone, they were working with naturally occurring biological computers, crystal matrices capable of storing and transmitting information across vast distances. The implications of this discovery ripple outward like waves through deep water. If ancient humans understood how to use the Earth's geological formations as communication networks, as consciousness-enhancing devices, as libraries for storing information in crystalline matrices that could last for geological ages, then we must reconsider everything we think we know about the sophistication of early civilizations in the sacred valley of the Nile. The limestone bedrock beneath the Giza plateau shows signs of water erosion that predate the traditional dating of the pyramids by thousands of years. The geological evidence suggests that these monuments were built in response to or in preparation for cataclysmic flooding events that reshaped the landscape of human consciousness. The builders knew something was coming, something written in the stone records of previous catastrophes, and they left us warnings encoded in mathematical relationships and astronomical alignments that we are still struggling to decipher. Deep in the Australian outback, where red earth meets endless sky and time moves with the patient rhythm of geological epochs, Aboriginal elders speak of stones that dream. These are not metaphors or primitive superstitions, but sophisticated understanding of how information can be stored in mineral matrices, how the Earth itself functions as a vast memory system, recording and preserving the essential patterns of life, consciousness, and cosmic cycles. The Dreamtime stories of Aboriginal Australians describe a period when ancestral spirits moved across the land, singing the world into existence. Every hill, every river, every rock formation was formed by these songs, and the songs continue to resonate within the geological structures, waiting to be awakened by those who know how to listen. Modern geologists studying the Australian continent have discovered that these oral traditions contain astonishingly accurate information about geological events that occurred tens of thousands of years, agorizing sea levels, volcanic eruptions, the formation of mountain ranges and river systems. How is it possible for oral traditions to preserve such detailed geological information across such vast spans of time? The answer may lie in the understanding that consciousness and geology are not separate phenomena, but are part of a single, interconnected system. The Earth itself may function as a form of consciousness, storing and processing information on scales that dwarf human comprehension. Consider the work of Dr. James Lovelock and his Gaia hypothesis, the theory that the Earth functions as a single, self-regulating system, more like a living organism than a dead rock floating in space. From this perspective, the geological processes that shape our planet, the movement of tectonic plates, the carbon cycle, the flow of ocean currents, the patterns of weather and climate are not random mechanical processes, but are part of a vast planetary intelligence, a form of consciousness that operates on geological timescales. If this is true, then the stones that our ancestors regarded as sacred, the geological formations they chose as sites for their most important ceremonies and monuments, may have been selected because they serve as interface points between human consciousness and planetary consciousness, places where the fast, flickering awareness of human minds can connect with the slow, deep wisdom of geological time. In the Himalayas, Tibetan monks speak of terma-sacred texts and teachings that were hidden in the landscape itself by enlightened masters, to be discovered when humanity was ready to receive them. These teachings are not hidden in physical books or carved tablets, but are embedded in the consciousness of the land itself, in the vibrational patterns of specific rock formations, in the way sunlight falls across mountain faces at particular times of year, and the sound of wind through stone valleys. The practice of revealing terma requires a unique form of consciousness, one that can perceive the subtle information patterns stored in geological formations. The tertan, or treasure revealer, must be able to read the land like a vast book, perceiving the encoded wisdom that was placed there by previous generations of awakened beings. This is not supernatural ability, but represents a sophisticated understanding of how consciousness interacts with the information storage capacity of crystalline and mineral structures. Modern quantum physics has begun to explore similar phenomena. Researchers studying quantum entanglement and non-local consciousness have discovered that information can be stored and transmitted through quantum fields that permeate all matter, including geological formations. The concept of morphic resonance, proposed by biologist Rupert Sheldrake, suggests that patterns of information can be transmitted across space and time through resonant fields that connect similar structures and processes. From this perspective, the ancient stone circles, the megalithic monuments, the sacred mountains and crystal caves that our ancestors held in such reverence, were not just places of worship, but were functioning components of a planetary information system and network of consciousness that connected human awareness with the deeper intelligence of the Earth itself. In the volcanic landscapes of Iceland, where the Earth's molten heart breaks through the thin skin of the planet's surface, geological time becomes viscerally present. Here, the boundaries between past, present, and future blur like heat waves, rising from fresh lava flows. The island itself is a newborn in geological terms, less than 20 million years old, still growing and reshaping itself with each volcanic eruption, each shift of the tectonic plates that slowly pull the island apart along the mid-Atlantic ridge, standing at the edge of an active volcano, watching molten rock flow like a river of liquid fire. One begins to understand what the ancients meant when they spoke of stones that dream. This is the Earth dreaming in real time, creating new land through the force of its own deep imagination. The geological processes that seem so slow and gradual from a human perspective reveal themselves here as expressions of a vast creative intelligence that thinks in terms of millions of years but acts with the immediacy of an artist's brush on canvas. The Icelandic concept of land vita, land spirits that inhabit specific geological features, reflects this understanding of the Earth as a conscious entity. Each mountain, each glacier, each volcanic formation is seen as having its own personality, its own form of awareness, its own role in the larger conversation between human consciousness and planetary intelligence. The traditional practice of consulting with these land spirits before making any significant changes to the landscape acknowledges that human activities are part of a larger ecological and geological dialogue. Dr. Christianella, a volcanologist who has spent his career studying the geological processes of Iceland, speaks of his work in terms that blur the boundaries between science and spirituality. When you study volcanic systems over decades, he explains, you begin to recognize patterns that seem almost intentional, as if the Earth is following some kind of plan or purpose. The timing of eruptions, the way new islands form, the patterns of heat flow through the crust. There's an intelligence here that operates on scales we're just beginning to understand. This recognition of intelligence within geological processes is not limited to active volcanic regions. Throughout the world, geologists and earth scientists are discovering patterns and processes that suggest levels of organization and complexity that challenge traditional mechanistic models of how the planet works. The way river systems organize themselves into fractal patterns, the precise mathematical relationships that govern crystal formation, the feedback loops that maintain stable climate conditions over geological time all point to the presence of information processing capabilities within the Earth system itself. Perhaps the most profound example of this geological intelligence can be found in the way the Earth has maintained conditions suitable for life over billions of years. Despite catastrophic changes in solar output, asteroid impacts, massive volcanic eruptions, and the gradual evolution of the atmosphere and oceans, this stability is not passive but represents active regulation, a form of planetary consciousness that continuously adjusts and rebalances global systems to maintain the delicate conditions necessary for life to flourish. The Aboriginal Australians have a concept called country that captures this understanding perfectly. Country is not just the physical landscape, but includes the spiritual and conscious dimensions of the land, the stories it tells, the memories it holds, the intelligence that flows through its geological formations and ecological systems. To be in proper relationship with country means to recognize that you are in conversation with a conscious entity, one that has been thinking and dreaming and creating for millions of years before your arrival and will continue to do so long after your departure. This perspective transforms our understanding of human history. Instead of seeing ourselves as separate from the geological processes that shape our planet, we begin to recognize that human consciousness and geological consciousness are part of a single, evolving system. Our civilizations rise and fall according to geological rhythms. Our technologies and cultural achievements are expressions of the same creative intelligence that builds mountains and carves canyons and shapes continents. The ancient wisdom traditions understood this relationship intuitively. That's why they placed their most sacred sites at locations where geological forces were most active and mountains where the Earth's crust was thinnest, near volcanic regions where the planet's inner fire was close to the surface, in caves where underground rivers had carved sacred spaces in the living rock. These were places where human consciousness could most easily connect with the deeper intelligence of the planet itself, in the silence of deep caves, where no human voice has echoed. For centuries, strange formations continue to grow with infinite patience. Stalactites and stalagmites reach toward each other across vast chambers, millimeter by millimeter, drop by drop, measuring time not in years or decades, but in the slow accumulation of mineral deposits that record the chemical composition of rainwater, the temperature fluctuations of surface seasons, the subtle changes in atmospheric composition that mark the passage of geological ages. These formations are books written in stone, their pages composed of calcium carbonate layers that can be read like tree rings to reconstruct the history of climate and environment over thousands of years. But they are more than just passive records. They are active participants in a conversation between the surface world and the deep earth, mediating the exchange of water, minerals, and gases that keeps our planet's systems in dynamic balance. Dr. Sarah Chen, a cave scientist who has spent decades studying speleotum formations, describes her work as learning to read the Earth's diary. Each cave system she studies contains information about past climate conditions, volcanic eruptions, changes in vegetation patterns, even the rise and fall of human civilizations. The caves remember everything, she explains. They're like geological libraries, storing information about every major event that has affected the local environment over the past several 100,000 years. But the caves do more than just store information, they actively process it, creating complex feedback loops between surface conditions and deep earth processes. The chemistry of groundwater changes in response to surface vegetation, which affects the rate and composition of mineral deposition, which in turn affects the local hydrology and creates new pathways for water flow. The entire system functions as a kind of geological neural network, processing environmental information and responding to changes in ways that help maintain long-term stability. This understanding of caves as information processing systems helps explain why so many ancient cultures regarded cave systems as sacred spaces, places where human consciousness could access deeper levels of awareness and wisdom. The acoustic properties of caves, the way they amplify and modulate sound waves, the unique electromagnetic fields created by flowing water and mineral deposits all create conditions that can alter human consciousness, inducing states of expanded awareness that were recognized by ancient peoples as forms of divine communication. The cave paintings of Lascaux, Altamira, and countless other sites around the world were not just artistic expressions, but were part of ritualistic practices designed to facilitate communication between human consciousness and the intelligence of the earth itself. The images were painted in locations where the acoustic properties of the cave created natural sound chambers, where the flickering light of torches would make the painted animals seem to move and dance on the curved stone walls. These were not primitive peoples decorating their homes, but sophisticated practitioners of consciousness technologies that we are only beginning to understand. They knew that certain geological formations could amplify and focus human awareness, creating states of consciousness in which the boundaries between self and environment dissolved, revealing the interconnected nature of all existence. Modern research in cognitive archaeology and neuroarchaeology has confirmed that many ancient sacred sites were designed to induce specific altered states of consciousness, the dimensions and proportions of chambers in megalithic monuments, the acoustic properties of stone circles, the electromagnetic fields generated by certain types of rock formations were carefully calibrated to affect human brain states in precise ways. Professor David Lewis Williams, a leading researcher in this field, suggests that these sites functioned as interfaces between ordinary consciousness and what he calls non-ordinary reality, states of awareness in which humans could access information and insights that were not available through normal waking consciousness. From this perspective, the great stone monuments of antiquity were not just religious buildings, but were functioning technologies for consciousness exploration and expansion. The implications of this understanding extend far beyond archaeology and anthropology. If ancient humans had access to consciousness technologies that allowed them to commune directly with planetary intelligence, to receive information about geological and climatic cycles, to understand their place in the larger web of terrestrial and cosmic systems, then we need to reconsider our assumptions about the trajectory of human civilization. Perhaps what we call progress is not a linear movement from primitive to advanced, but is instead a cyclical process in which humanity periodically achieves high levels of integration with planetary consciousness, only to lose that connection and have to rediscover it through different means. The geological record certainly supports this cyclical view of civilization, with evidence of advanced knowledge and technology appearing at different times in different locations, often separated by long periods of apparent decline or forgetting. As the sun sets over the ancient landscape, casting long shadows across stone formations that have witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, a profound question emerges from the silence. If the stones do indeed remember, if the earth itself functions as a vast consciousness that thinks in geological timescales, what are we to make of the current moment in planetary history? What messages are being encoded in the rock record? Even now, as we live through what many scientists call the Anthropocene, the geological age, defined by human impact on Earth systems, the geological evidence of our current epoch will be unmistakable to future investigators. The chemical signatures of industrial civilization, the plastic sediments accumulating in ocean basins, the isotopic markers of nuclear testing, the mass extinction event currently underway will be preserved in the rock record as clearly as the iridium layer that marks the asteroid impact that ended the age of dinosaurs. But perhaps there are other messages being encoded as well, more subtle, signatures of the expansion of human consciousness that is occurring alongside our technological development. The global network of consciousness researchers, the revival of interest in ancient wisdom traditions, the recognition of the Earth as a living system. These developments may also leave their mark in ways we are only beginning to understand. Dr. Lynn McTaggart, a researcher studying the intersection of consciousness and quantum physics, suggests that human consciousness itself may be evolving in response to planetary crisis. developing new capacities for perceiving and interacting with the Earth's natural systems. We're witnessing the emergence of what we might call ecological consciousness. She explains, a form of awareness that naturally perceives the interconnectedness of all life and recognizes human beings as participants in rather than separate from the larger web of planetary intelligence. This emerging ecological consciousness may represent a return to ways of knowing that were common among our ancestors but were lost during the development of industrial civilization. The shamanic traditions of indigenous peoples around the world speak of the ability to communicate directly with natural systems, to receive information from plants, animals, and geological formations, to participate consciously in the larger conversation of life on Earth. Modern scientific research is beginning to validate these traditional claims. Studies of plant intelligence have shown that forests function as information processing networks, with trees communicating through fungal connections that span entire ecosystems. Research into animal consciousness has revealed complex forms of awareness and communication that were previously unrecognized, and investigations into the electromagnetic and quantum properties of biological systems are uncovering mechanisms through which consciousness might indeed interact directly with natural systems. Perhaps the greatest geological mystery of our time is not hidden in ancient rock formations, but is being written in the present moment. As human consciousness evolves in response to planetary crisis, developing new capacities for perception and communication that may help us navigate the challenges ahead. The stones that future geologists will study may contain evidence not just of our technological impact, but of a transformation in consciousness that allowed our species to remember its place in the larger community of Earth life. In the quiet moments just before dawn, when the night sky fades and the first light touches the ancient stones, it's possible to sense this larger conversation still taking place. The mountains continue their slow dance across the planet's surface. The crystals deep in the Earth's crust continue to grow and organize themselves according to principles we're still discovering, and the vast intelligence that moves through geological processes continues its patient work of creating and sustaining the conditions for life to flourish. We are part of this conversation, whether we recognize it or not. Every step we take sends vibrations through the Earth's crust. Every breath we exhale changes the composition of the atmosphere. Every thought we think contributes to the field of consciousness that surrounds and interpenetrates our planet. The question is not whether we are in relationship with the Earth's intelligence, but whether we will learn to participate in that relationship consciously, with the wisdom and reverence it deserves. The ancient stones stand as silent witnesses to this possibility, holding in their crystalline matrices the memory of times when humans knew how to listen to the Earth's voice, how to read the messages written in stone and sky and flowing water. They remind us that consciousness and geology are not separate phenomena, but are aspects of a single magnificent process of cosmic evolution, process in which every particle of matter and every particle of matter and every flash of awareness plays its part in the unfolding. The story of the universe itself, in the deep quiet that follows understanding. When the mind settles like sediment in still water and awareness expands to encompass geological timescales, the boundaries between dreamer and dreamed begin to dissolve. The stones that have been our companions on this journey, the mysterious rich art structure, the carved chambers of Cappadocia, the crystal caves that sing with accumulated light, the flood-scoured landscapes that remember catastrophe and renewal of it, themselves not as separate objects, but as expressions of a single, vast consciousness that dreams in stone and fire and ice. We are part of that dream. Temporary arrangements of atoms and awareness that have emerged from the Earth's long meditation on the nature of consciousness itself. Our civilizations rise and fall like waves on a geological shore, each one carrying forward some fragment of the wisdom that accumulates slowly, patiently, in the mineral memory of the planet's deep structures. The geological mysteries that have drawn our attention throughout this journey are not puzzles to be solved, but invitations to participate more consciously in the conversation that has been taking place between Earth and consciousness for billions of years. The ancients who built their monuments at the intersections of geological force fields, who aligned their ceremonies with the rhythms of cosmic and planetary cycles, who spoke of stones that sing and waters that remember they were not primitive. Peoples lost in superstition but were sophisticated participants in a form of science that integrated consciousness and cosmos into a single, unified understanding. That understanding is available to us now, encoded in the stone records that surround us, written in the patterns of crystal growth and volcanic eruption and erosion and deposition that continue to reshape our world. We need only learn how to read the language of stone and water and fire, how to attune our consciousness to the slower rhythms of geological time, how to recognize our own thoughts and dreams as expressions of the same creative intelligence that builds mountains and shapes continents. In the end, the deepest geological mystery is not something that happened in the distant past, but is happening right now. In this moment, as consciousness and matter continue their ancient dance of creation and discovery, we are the Earth becoming aware of itself, the planet's way of understanding its own nature and purpose. The stones dream, and we are their dreams made manifest. Walking expressions of the Earth's own curiosity about the nature of existence as sleep approaches, and the day's thoughts settle into the quiet depths where dreams are born. Let the awareness of geological time expand through your consciousness like rings on still water. Feel the ancient stones beneath the soil, the slow pulse of tectonic plates, the patient accumulation of wisdom in crystal matrices that have been growing in darkness for millions of years. Rest in the knowledge that you are part of something infinitely larger and more beautiful than the brief span of individual existence. You are a note in the Earth's ongoing song, a moment of awareness in the planet's vast meditation on the mystery of being, the mystery of being. The stones will continue their dreaming long after human civilization has passed into memory, but the consciousness that looks through human eyes, that wonders and questions and seeks to understand that consciousness, is not separate from the intelligence that moves through geological processes. It is the same awareness, expressed at different scales, participating in the same vast exploration of possibility that has been unfolding since the first atoms condensed from cosmic fire and began their long journey toward complexity and consciousness. In your dreams tonight, you may find yourself walking through landscapes of stone and crystal, where the boundaries between self and earth dissolve into a deeper recognition of unity. These are not mere fantasies, but are memories of your true nature, glimpses of the geological consciousness that moves through all things, the planetary awareness that dreams us into existence and holds us in its infinite embrace. Sleep well, knowing that you rest in the arms of a living Earth, that your dreams contribute to the planet's own dreaming, that your consciousness is both human and geological, both temporary and eternal, both individual and cosmic. The stones remember everything, and in the depths of sleep, you remember that you are the stones dreaming of being human. The mystery continues, written in stone and starlight, in the slow dance of countenance and the quick flutter of consciousness. in the patient work of crystals growing in darkness and the sudden illumination of understanding that lights the human mind. We are all part of the same story, the same vast exploration of what it means to be aware in a universe of infinite possibility. And in the morning, when you wake from dreams of deep time and ancient stone, you will carry with you a whisper of that geological consciousness, a memory of the vast intelligence that moves through all things, patient as mountains, enduring as granite, mysterious as the force that shapes worlds and dreams universes into being. The stones are dreaming still, and we are blessed to be there. Dreams, if this story stayed with you as you drifted off, support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing. We release weekly journeys into the forgotten, and every dreaming soul is welcome here.